Hey, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be yet another great late night conversation. Glad to be here. Glad to be back. Let's go.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
All right, everybody. I am so glad that you are all here with me tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation. A lot is going on. Now, the way we do things, I'm sure those of you who watch this are quite familiar with how we do things, but there may be new people joining. So the way we do things, first I give my opening remarks, whatever it is that I'm going to talk about. That's what I do in my opening remarks. Then from there, we do the roll call, where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. We find out who is on the other side of the camera. That's always a lot of fun because we have quite a diverse audience. And we have a great, very diverse audience, and it's in many different parts of the country and many different parts of the world. And it's always great to do the roll call. Then after that, after the roll call and after the opening remarks that came before the roll call, then I answer your questions for the remainder of the show, for the remainder of the night. That's the way the second half of our program goes. So if you have something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, I would encourage you to send a super chat on YouTube or a Rumble rant on Rumble. That's the way the second half of our show goes. That's the way that it works. Now, we do have a couple announcements. The first of which is Center for Political Innovation. Join. We are back in business. We are reincorporated, and we have a brand new website. The Center for Political Innovation is back in business, and we've got some very exciting things in the works. Very shortly, tomorrow, the next day, there's a very exciting project in the works. Can't say too much about it, but you'll know about it when it comes out. It's in the next couple days. We got the new website up. We're working on a lot of different things, all leading up to the inauguration, and our planned activities during the inauguration should be awesome. So there's that, and then. In addition to that, we do every morning on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel, we do have morning messages. We made a point of having morning messages, and apparently, it looks like we will be having them start up once again soon. We will be having them start up again soon. So, if you would like to submit a morning message, we do have links to the morning message, and you can become a dues paying member on our website. Then you'll start getting invited to our Saturday meetings and all of that. So you can join CPI and you can watch the morning messages on our CPI YouTube channel. It's all good. It's all good. Yeah, we should be going on Rumble right now. I'm looking at Rumble. It seems to be live. We're here on YouTube, Rumble, and we're on Facebook. We're on Facebook. I can't see the Facebook. I can see the Rumble. I can see the YouTube. And yeah, we're live on Rumble. A few people watch on Rumble. Mainly our audience is on YouTube. That's the way these things work. I will fight to stay on YouTube until my last breath, as they say. But yeah, all is good. So join on the website and check out the morning messages on the YouTube channel of the Center for Political Innovation. Now, as I said before, the way we do things on this channel is I give my opening remarks. My opening remarks are then followed by a roll call. And then after that, I answer your questions. So if there's anything you'd like me to talk about in the second half of our show, by all means, send a Rumble rant on Rumble or a super chat on YouTube. And I guess I will now get into what it was that I wanted to talk about tonight. I was thinking about various things that I could use to illustrate the points that we make on this YouTube channel, what we're trying to communicate, what we're trying to do, and how we understand things. And there are many different ways that one could make the points. One could help people to understand the world. But I have found that one of the best ways to make political points to people when it comes to deeper ideology is to talk about art, movies, literature, things like that. And I've also learned that if someone is incapable of having a political conversation with you about a movie, that is a sign of greater weakness on their part. I have thought many times about this. There was somebody I met years ago who could not understand that Batman: The Dark Knight Rises had political meaning. And I explained about Occupy Wall Street and freeing the prisoners and all of that. And they just, no, that's because Gotham is corrupt. That's because they just could not understand that the movie Dark Knight Rises, the Christopher Nolan Batman film, they could not understand that it had political implications. There was somebody else I once had a conversation with about the movie The Magnificent Seven, the classic cowboy movie from the 1950s, maybe early 60s. And I talked about how it's based on the movie The Seven Samurai, and it's an analogy for the Marxist Vanguard Party and all this. And they said, no, they just couldn't understand it. They were looking at me strangely like, what? Huh? And I've learned that, it's a certain weakness that some people have, that they're incapable of understanding that movies have political implications. Now, beyond that, and this is interesting, there are people who will understand that movies and films and books and television programs and all these things, music, has political implications. But they get very offended, and this is an interesting one, they get very, very offended if a work of art that they like and enjoy is politically critiqued, and they will bend over backwards to say that's not what the art is really saying. They will take personal offense. Why are you attacking my favorite movie? Why are you criticizing my favorite movie, my work of art? And it doesn't occur to them that one can enjoy a movie or a song or a TV show or a book and not agree with its political message. Right. And they almost feel like if you are criticizing the work of art that they really, really like, if you're pointing to the flaws in its political message, that means that you are calling them a bad person for enjoying it, or you're saying that they should not partake of and enjoy it. And I don't agree with that either. That is also a problematic thing. I mean, one should consume even straight up political material one disagrees with, right? One should know what the various arguments are. There's nothing wrong with watching a film. Years ago, I critiqued the Harry Potter books and films. I critiqued them, and I pointed out that they were, very much inspired by the New Left. That there was kind of an anti-working class undertone to some of it, and it was very much a fantasy of the 1960s New Left and the hippie counterculture. The villains were obviously stodgy conservatives, and the Dursleys were like a caricature of the aristocracy of labor, of the right-wing Brexit British working class, and that the magic people kind of, they almost mimicked hippies and counterculture. And on top of that, that there was an element of like glorifying youth and youthful defiance and rebellion. And, I just pointed all this out, that, the fact that J.K. Rowling protested the Vietnam War, that she attended a school that was, very much from a leftist tradition, that her hero was Jessica Mitford. You can see that it is kind of a new left fantasy. And this person she came to agree with my political message, but she took great offense. How, my God, how can you say that? And she got really upset. And I said, you can still like this work of art, even if you are critical of the political message. I honestly know of very few works of art that have a political message that is exactly what I think. And that said, there are works of art that I agree with politically that I don't agree with aesthetically. Right. Great example of that. There's two movies that are left-wing leftist films that I've compared many times. One is V for Vendetta, and the other is The Wind That Shakes the Barley. V for Vendetta is it's based on a comic book from the 1980s. It takes place in a futuristic authoritarian Britain. And there's an anarchist who leads kind of an uprising against the state. And the state is kind of a right-wing authoritarian state where gay people and Muslims are all being rounded up and arrested. And, and the hero is an individualist who engages in left adventurous terrorism. And it's very romantic and all of that. And Wind That Shakes the Barley is a film about the Irish Civil War. And the creation of the Irish Free State, and the Ireland getting its independence from Britain, and that whole thing. Now, The Wind That Shakes the Barley, politically, I would agree with more. That the Irish freedom struggle, which was becoming a socialist struggle, right, in the aftermath of the First World War, you had the legacy of James Connolly, and the Irish freedom struggle was kind of becoming a struggle to create a socialist society, a struggle for national liberation. And it was sold out by the moderates. And the film portrays that in great detail. It's made by Ken Loach, a British Trotskyite filmmaker. And the film V for Vendetta, I probably would agree with less, in that it doesn't talk about economics at all. It's simply talking about repression, in that it says the solution is some kind of fantasy individual terror rebellion, some kind of Robin Hood figure who blows things up, individualism. I would probably agree with V for Vendetta less in a political sense, but emotionally, after you watch V for Vendetta, you feel inspired, right? It ends on this very glorious, like almost Wagnerian note, and the credits come up and they're playing Street Fighting Man by the Rolling Stones, and you want to go out and fight for justice. Whereas when you watch Ken Loach's Wind That Shakes the Barley, politically, it is correct, right? It is telling exactly a true story about how the Irish freedom struggle escalated in the direct aftermath of World War I and was becoming a working class revolution of sorts. And so it was sold out by comprador elements. But Wind That Shakes the Barley is a very, very, very depressing film. And it basically begins, with the heroes becoming very inspired and wanting to fight for their freedom, and then becoming very, very demoralized and feeling like, what was it all worth, and being betrayed and murdered by their friends. And it ends on a very, very somber, sad note. And so in that sense, I would say that I might agree politically with the message of The Wind That Shakes the Barley, but I don't think it's what people need to see. And I would agree less with V for Vendetta, but it gives people the emotional feeling and the inspiration that they need more of. So there's many layers to all of this, right? You can have art that has a bad political message, but it's just a good movie. You can have art that has a good political message, but doesn't give people the emotions that they need, doesn't inspire people in the right way. You can have art that is not as good politically, but it gives people hope and inspiration and passion. There's many, many, many layers to all of this. And when you're talking about art and you're mixing art with politics, you have to just view it in that light. And that is something that I urge you to do. You all are watching this, and I want you to be as smart as you can be. I want you to think with as much depth as you can possibly have. I want you to examine art and literature and movies with a sense of understanding what it is that you're consuming. Because the problem is, right, and I'll just say this, a lot of people just turn on Netflix these days. They just turn on Netflix. And there's nothing wrong with that. My wife is probably watching Netflix right now in the other room, right? Nothing wrong with that. But you have to understand that there are certain messages that Netflix is putting out. And you have to kind of be on guard for those messages. And you have to consciously decide what you want to consume, what you don't want to consume. And you have to be able to see political messages where they are, right? And you have to consume art with an awareness of what you're doing, right? It's just like you don't just eat anything, right? You know, if you want to eat healthy, you want to eat to have energy, right? You want to make a conscious choice about what you eat. And the same is for art, right? You wouldn't just put anything in your body. Or if you did, you'd say, okay, I'm consuming this, but I know it's very fattening. I'm consuming this. I know it's full of fiber, right? I mean, it's like you want to consume art and literature and music in the same way you would eat food. In the same way you would, determine where you're going to live. You want to make a decision that is most in line with who you want to be. And you want to be the most smart and aware person that you can be. You want to be the most inspired and motivated person you want to be. You want to be the person who's capable of making the greatest contribution to the world around you and to the political movement that you're part of. So you want to consume art with that understanding, with the understanding that this is what I'm getting. And that doesn't mean that you're on guard against a message that you might not agree with. In fact, it may be that art changes your mind. It may be that art, art enables you to think about an issue in a way you've never thought about it before. It may be that art enables you to see from the other perspective. And that I would urge you to consume art in a knowledgeable way, and to enhance your own understanding of the world by consuming art in a more sophisticated way. And I wanted to talk to you all about that. And I wanted to start out the conversation about that because, there's a lot of things we talk about on these streams a lot. One thing we talk a lot about is globalism and the World Economic Forum, and how there are certain people that want you to eat bugs and be happy about it, and own nothing and be happy about it, and live in a pod and be happy about it. And there's a lot of people who are under the impression that is socialism, and they're right in a strange way, because the person who's the father of that kind of thinking, I shouldn't say the father, but one of the most influential developers of that elitist mindset was H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells was not only the author of The Time Machine and The Invisible Man, and we know him as the science fiction writer of Britain, but he was also a political theorist, and he called himself a socialist. He was a member of the Fabian Society, which was a socialist group in Britain that was part of the Labour Party. It's actually still around. It's called the Fabian Society. And the Fabian Society was a group created in Britain, and it was named after the Roman general Quintus Fabius Maximus Vercusus, whose nickname was the Delayer. And he was a Roman general who won wars through protracted long-term struggle, right? He was involved in the war against Carthage, and he was known for his persistence, harassment, and wearing the enemy down through long-term attrition rather than pitched battles. That's what Wikipedia says. I'm just reading to you from Wikipedia there. And the Fabian Society is a lot of very famous British intellectuals were part of the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society is part of the British Labour Party, but they were opposed to a revolution. They were opposed to Marxism, but they called themselves socialists, and that they wanted some kind of government-controlled economy. They wanted state control over the economy to some degree. And they wanted to implement their reforms very, very gradually. And H.G. Wells was also a Malthusian. He was the president of the Malthusian League. He believed that there was too many people in the world, and that because there were too many people in the world, it was necessary to drive down the population. He was very much a Malthusian. And, he very openly talked about eugenics. He talked about a lot of things. And in the final years of his life, in the final time, up into World War II, etc., he stopped really writing science fiction, and he started writing political manifestos and screeds. And he wrote this book, which we'll get into later, called The New World Order. And I'm going to read to you some from The New World Order. But we have to also put this in the context of a lot of things that we've talked about on these streams, about the rich versus the ultra-rich, about the British Empire and the Eastern establishment, the Anglo-American establishment, and all of that. But I think we can start out by watching a trailer for the film version of his probably most famous novel, The Time Machine. I just want to start out by saying this. They made a movie of The Time Machine when I was in high school that was awful. It was absolutely awful and had absolutely nothing to do with the book. They made a movie called The Time Machine, and other than there being a time machine in it, and it was a guy on the 1800s going into the future, it had nothing to do with the book. But the 1960 version of The Time Machine is very close to the novel, except I'll get into that later, but let's watch the trailer. This is the trailer for the 1960 version of the film The Time Machine, based on the novel The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, the British Fabian socialist and Malthusian.
Such stories as H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds and Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea have challenged mankind. So today, man is successfully probing deep into the mysteries of the universe. Can he penetrate the greatest mystery of all, time itself? It took the creative magic of George Pal and the fabulous production know-how of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer to catapult you through time into a world that is yet to be.
Why is it that we usually ignore the fourth dimension? You see, we can move in the other three. As the doctor said, up, down, forwards, backwards, sideways. But when it comes to time, we are prisoners.
Inventor Rod Taylor's breakthrough into the realm of the fourth dimension is defied by his friend Alan Young.
If that machine can do what you say it can, destroy it, George, before it destroys you.
Every moment is a year.
That's like a thing you see in like British films, right? Is, kind of like Harry Potter has his red-haired working class sidekick, Ron Weasley. The Time Machine guy has his red-haired sidekick who's Scottish. Destroy that thing before it destroys you. I'm a Scotsman. I'm a working class Scotsman trying to talk some common sense into you, British aristocrat. Don't go in there, Harry Potter. Anyway.
Through the atomic wars of the future on an incredible excursion into the unknown. What are the people like? Ah, the shape of things to come. It's lovely Yvette Mimieux.
Which, by the way, The Shape of Things to Come is another H.G. Wells novel, mind you. But anyway.
And what happens when boy meets girl thousands of years hence?
How do they wear their hair?
Who?
The women of your time.
Up like that?
Show me.
Is this the human race of the future? Or is this the Morlocks, fiendish creatures who live in a weird underground world?
They live in a weird underground world. J.D. Vance must live there with them. It's weird. It's a little weird. I'm sorry. I just think that's funny, right? Because that's the catchphrase. That was the Democratic Party campaign slogan. So they live in a weird underground world with J.D. Vance.
And the Eloi, the tranquil sunshine people, who the Morlocks dominate and maintain like cattle, luring them below with the hypnotic wail of the sirens, to feed upon them in cannibalistic horror.
So there you go. Well, I have to correct you, Carter, because he didn't go back in time. He went forward in time. Right. So I will break down the story of the time machine, basically. So the guy invents a time machine and he goes forward in time. And he goes so far forward in time that he enters this future thousands of years from now. And in this future, there are two species. The human race has divided into two species, and the two species are evolved from the capitalists and the workers. And the workers, they live underground, and they have evolved into this super strong race of underground monsters that are super strong and evil and barbaric. And the capitalists have evolved into these super weak and nice midgets that are very, very innocent and, you know, get devoured by the workers. The workers are called Morlocks, and they live beneath the ground, and they have these big mechanical, scary machines, and they're hairy like apes or whatever, and they're big, mean, and scary. And the capitalists are these like midgets, you know, that are short and they're just so nice and innocent, but they're very easily preyed upon. And it's supposed to be that the industrial worker and the industrial capitalist, the human race, has divided into two species. That's basically what he's arguing. Based on Darwin's theory of evolution, he's arguing, oh, we've got the capitalists and the workers, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And after a while, they were just so different, and through evolution, through Darwinian evolution, they evolved into two different species. That's what the time machine that's the premise of it, right? And the capitalists are the good guys. The capitalists are just these innocent little creatures that walk around, and they don't have much technology, and they just kind of walk around, and they're very silly and dainty. And the workers are big, scary, giant monkeys that cannibalize them and terrorize them. That's a very, very odd thing for a socialist to think of, right? I mean, generally in the socialist narrative, the workers are the good guys and the capitalists are the bad guys. And they don't evolve into two separate species. Rather, the workers come together and seize control of the means of production. But that's just the beginning of pointing to why H.G. Wells was a socialist in a very, very different way. And this is what I wanted to talk to you all about. H.G. Wells called himself a socialist his entire life, and he was part of the Fabian Society, He was an adherent of the British Labour Party, which is now the ruling party in Britain, the party of Keir Starmer. But what H.G. Wells believed was very, very, very different than what many of the forces around the world that have sought to build socialism with. And it says a lot about what it is that the Trump movement is against. When we talk about the World Economic Forum, and you'll own bugs, you'll own nothing and be happy about it, and you'll eat bugs and all of that. We're talking about a dystopian fantasy dreamed up by some very, very wealthy people who are tied in with the British ultra-rich. And this is something I've talked about on these streams a lot. It's become a recurring theme. I've talked about the Anglo-American establishment, right? Carroll Quigley, who was the mentor of Bill Clinton. I'm going to pull his book out, but it's underneath the computer. So we just got to, take a step downward there. And we got the Anglo-American establishment. Carroll Quigley, who was Bill Clinton's academic mentor. He wrote 2 books in his life. One is huge. It's thousands of pages long, and it's called Tragedy and Hope. And the other is this very short book called The Anglo-American Establishment. And the book argued that that within the United States, there was a power struggle between the wealthy people, most of whom just wanted to make money, and the ultra-rich, the old New England money that was tied in with the British Empire. And that old New England money wants to maintain control and power for as long as possible. And in order to do that, they're okay getting the government heavily involved in the economy, and they're okay stabilizing the economy with economic controls because they want to stay in power. And they tend to have a Malthusian worldview. And H.G. Wells and the Fabians were loved by the British Empire and loved by the Eastern establishment. Many times on these streams, I have quoted to you all. I've quoted to you all about Cecil Rhodes. Now, who was Cecil Rhodes? Cecil Rhodes was a British colonizer. He colonized Africa. And Cecil Rhodes, he colonized a big chunk of Africa, and he called it Rhodesia after himself. He was Cecil Rhodes, and he created Rhodesia. Rhodesia is now Zimbabwe because the people of Rhodesia rose up and overthrew the apartheid state that Cecil Rhodes created. And Cecil Rhodes is also the founder of the Rhodes Scholar Program that almost all the American elite, you go through the Democratic Party, you flip through the channels, Rachel Maddow, all of these people in our political establishment were Rhodes Scholars. And the Rhodes Scholar Program is a huge British foundation to pay for people to go over to Britain and study. And there's the Rhodes Scholar Program, and there's Rhodesia. And I have quoted many times that Lenin, in his book Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, he quotes Cecil Rhodes. And he quotes him saying something very, very important. In 1895, Cecil Rhodes wrote, "I was in the East End of London, a working class quarter, yesterday, and I attended a rally of the unemployed, and I listened to their wild speeches, and they were just a cry for bread, bread, bread. And on my way home, I pondered the scene, and I became more than ever convinced of the importance of imperialism. My cherished idea is a solution to the social problem. In order to save the 40 million inhabitants of the United Kingdom from a bloody civil war, we colonial statesmen must acquire new lands and new markets to provide for the goods produced in the factories and mines. The empire, as I have always said, is a bread and butter question. If you want to avoid civil war, you must become imperialists." Now, those are the very words of Cecil Rhodes, the British Empire guy, the Rhodes Scholar guy, the Rhodesia guy. Those are his very words. But what is he saying here? Now, first of all, he's saying he went to a meeting of the unemployed. Now, he's going to some kind of socialist rally of unemployed people protesting. And he says they're crying for bread, bread, bread. And he listened to their wild speeches because they're so fired up. And he became convinced of the importance of imperialism. And so in order to save the United Kingdom from bloody civil war, they must acquire new lands to settle the surplus population. That means he thinks there's too many people, right? It's not that there's not enough jobs for them. It's that there's just too many people to employ in his factories, right? And provide new markets for the goods produced in the factories and mines. Not go there and get their minerals, not go there and get their oil, but provide new markets for the goods produced in the factories and mines. And this is the point, folks. He says he's not saying we're going there to steal their natural resources like pirates, right? That's what people think imperialism is, and they are wrong. I have done the math for you on these live streams time after time again, and I'm going to do the math for you again. If there's anything you need to learn from me, right, it's this. Why is it that he felt Britain had a surplus population? And why is it that he felt they needed new markets for the goods and services they produced? Well, it's because of a built-in problem of production organized for profit. All right. I'm going to do this again because I want you to be able to do this. I would like you to be able to break this down for your family members. This is like one of the most important things to understand. I have done this. There's videos of me doing this. I've done it in documentaries. I will do it over and over and over again because it's really, really, really important. Okay? This is the problem that we're living in right now on steroids. So here we go. If you own a factory and you're making tires, you're going to need the materials those tires are made from. And that's A. That's the materials. And you're going to need to ship the tires to wherever you're selling them. That's B. And you're going to need labor power, human labor, to make the tires. And that's C. And then all of these costs will go into the final product, D. The final cost of the product is D. What's missing? Well, something's obviously missing from that. The capitalist has to make a profit. Now, he can't change how much the tires cost, and he can't change how much the materials cost, and he can't change how much shipping them costs. So the only place that he can extract his profit is from the labor power. So really, it becomes C1 and C2. Right? C1 is what the worker actually gets paid in terms of the wages, and C2 is the profit that is extracted by the capitalist. And when Marxists talk about exploitation, they're saying, look, the worker put C in, but he only gets paid C1. The capitalist is extracting C2. To which the classic response is, well, the capitalist put up the money. He had the idea. That's all missing the point, right? And that's my whole life. I've heard that argument over and over and over again. There's always someone, well, the capitalist took the risk and there would be no job if it wasn't for him. You're missing the point, right? This is just the surface of the problem. The problem is that what is paid out in wages is C1. In the process of putting a tire onto the market, it's D. The wages paid out are only C1. Well, C1 is always going to be less than D. You're always going to make more products than you pay out in wages. The capitalist is never paying out anywhere near enough in wages to buy the products that he creates. And this is the problem that they call the value crisis. This is the problem that Marx called overproduction, and that inevitably, as capitalists are making products, there always ends up being more product made than wages paid out. So as a result, pretty soon the price of the product goes down. It goes so low because there's so much of D being created. There's so many tires on the market that their value goes down very dramatically. And as a result, this doesn't work out. They can't afford to make any more tires and they go out of business. And that's called glut, G-L-U-T, glut. And it's the natural built-in problem of capitalism. And no system in history until capitalism ever had this problem, right? People becoming homeless because too much housing has been produced. People becoming hungry because too much food has been produced. There's always more product created in the process of production than there is wages paid out in the process of production. So what is Cecil Rhodes saying? We need to acquire new territory to make them buy our products. And that's what the British Empire did. The British Empire went to India, and the British Empire, the first big thing that they built that made them the industrial dominance of the world, the first thing that they did is they built a textile industry, making cloth. Well, the people in India had looms. They've been making looms and making their own cloth for thousands of years, at least hundreds of years. The British Empire went to India. They seized in India, and when they seized India, they burned down all the looms and forced them to import their cloth from British manufacturers. They had a new market to dump their excess goods on. That's what imperialism is. Imperialism is a way to deal with this problem of overproduction. However, this problem, it continues and it gets worse. Why? As I said at the beginning, you can't cut into the cost of the materials. You can't cut into the cost of the shipping. You can only cut in to the labor power. The capitalist can only extract profit from the labor, right? Only human labor produces value from which the capitalist can extract a profit. He cannot extract profit from any other aspect of the product. And when C, which is the human labor, goes down, right? So when the amount of human labor that goes into a production goes down, what does that mean? That means that as technology advances, there's less and less human labor necessary to make the product, right? And that's just the reality of how technology works, right? You replace human labor with technology, right? There's many examples, right? It used to be there were these things called book binderies where hundreds of people worked all day binding books. Now they have Amazon print on demand where one person pushes a button and the book comes out and they can print one book at a time. Well, what's that about? That's about the fact that the amount of human labor that goes into creating a book has drastically reduced. The amount of human labor that is needed to create a book is far lower than it once was. You don't have hundreds of people working at a book bindery. You don't have to print 5,000 copies of a book for it to be cost effective. One person pushes a button and the machine pumps the book out, right? So C, the amount of labor, human labor that goes into production goes down. What's the problem with that? C2, which is the amount of profit that can be extracted from that book or that product, can only come out of the human labor power. Only human labor creates value. Only human labor creates value. And so as C decreases, C2 also decreases. So the rate of profit that the capitalist makes on every product goes down because less human labor is involved. So soon he has to churn out even more products because the only way he can continue making the same amount of money is if the amount of human labor in the product goes down by half. In order to keep his profits where they are, he's got to make twice as many products, right? And this leads to a situation where every time you have a great technological leap, you have a long-term economic crisis because the market is constantly glutted with products that cannot be sold. And this is the built-in problem of capitalism. And Cecil Rhodes, I quote him in the City Builders book, Cecil Rhodes was saying that imperialism was about resolving this. And he said, look, there's a lot of people who don't have jobs in Britain. Let's ship them to Africa. Let's ship them to Asia to be overseers and colonial bosses. And we'll have less people here competing for jobs. And he says, also, we'll acquire new markets. We'll forcibly seize big chunks of the world and force them to buy our products. And that way, We won't have a glut of overproduction. And Cecil Rhodes, he says, the empire, as I have always seen it, is a bread and butter question. If you want to avoid civil war, you must become imperialist. To keep the hungry working class people who he's listening to in the East End of London, who are protesting with their wild speeches and crying for bread, 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 in order to stop them from banding together and rising up and overthrowing rich guys like Cecil Rhodes, he's got to go to Africa and he's got to go seize a bunch of territory. He's got to take a bunch of them to Africa and make them the bosses to whip the colonial slaves. He's got to make the African people start buying British products so that there's not a glut on the market. Imperialism is about maintaining capitalism. Imperialism is about dealing with the built-in problems of the capitalist mode of production. And Cecil Rhodes and H.G. Wells were of the same mindset, the same variety. And if you read this book, he wrote this just as World War II was breaking out. The New World Order by H.G. Wells. It comes across that H.G. Wells was a socialist, if you want to call him that, but he hated the working class, right? And I mean, we just showed a clip from the Time Machine. What are the working class in the Time Machine? Are they wealth producing people, great heroes of history? Absolutely not. What are the working class in his dark fantasy? This is the working class. They're the Morlocks.
The tranquil sunshine people, who the Morlocks dominate and maintain like cattle, luring them below with the hypnotic wail of the sirens, to feed upon them in cannibalistic horror.
Right, the working class are a bunch of Morlocks. The working class are bloodthirsty, scary cannibals. And it's the capitalists that are just good, nice people. They've evolved into this poor, innocent race of good, nice people who live above the ground and in the jungle or whatever. And then under the ground, you have these scary, scary Morlocks. And H.G. Wells, he doesn't see the working class as good people. He comes from money. He's a rich guy. And he's a socialist in that he wants heavy-handed social control. He wants control over the economy. But he's not a socialist in that he's fighting for the working class. By no means is he fighting for the working class. And in fact, if you read The New World Order by H.G. Wells, this is an interesting book. Now, he wrote this book as World War II was breaking out. And in the book, this is what he says. I'm just going to read to you some of what H.G. Wells wrote. The rich, the powerful generally, the more intelligent and acquisitive have always got away with things and sweated and oppressed and enslaved and brought frustrated the less intelligent, less equitatively, and the unwary. The haves in every generation have always gotten the better of the have-nots, and the have-nots have always resented the privations and their disadvantage. The haves have found themselves assailed by resentful, vindictive revolt. These incessantly recurring outbreaks of the losers against the winners have never once produced any permanent amelioration of the common lot or changed the future of the human race. Not once. The have-nots have never produced the intelligence and the ability that the haves have produced. I mean, he's blatantly saying that the capitalists are better than the workers. What kind of socialist is this? Right? The socialists are supposed to be champions of the workers against the capitalists. That's not H.G. Wells. Slave revolts, peasant revolts, revolts of the proletariat have been fits of rage, acute social fevers which have passed. The fact remains that history produces no reason for supposing that the have-nots, considered as a whole, have available any reserves of directive or administrative capacity and disinterested devotion superior to that of the more successful classes. Morally, intellectually, there is no reason to suppose better of them. He's blatantly saying that working class people are just inferior to the capitalists. Says, and thus comes the clumsy initiative of Marxism and class war dogma, which has done more to misdirect and sterilize human goodwill than any other misconception of reality, and has stifled human effort. Damn! This guy's supposed to be a socialist? But then he goes on. He says he equates the Soviet Union with Nazi Germany. I mean, this should sound really familiar to you. I don't know if you saw that, ContraPoints made a video basically saying the same thing. Let anyone read over the Communist Manifesto and consider who might have shared the hate or even got it all if Marx had not been the son of a rabbi. Read Jews for Bourgeoisie, and the manifesto is pure Nazi teaching of the 1933 to 38 vintage. So he's equating class struggle Marxism with Nazism because they both want to lead a revolt of the masses. And he talks with contempt, about Marxism, how he hates it. He goes on to say, and this is very interesting, Stalin, I believe, is an honest and benevolent in his intention, and he believes in collectivism simply and plainly, but he is still under the impression that he is making good of Russia and the countries within her sphere of influence. And he's self-righteously impatient with any criticism. His successor may not have the same disinterestedness. So he's saying he thinks Stalin is a good guy, but that Stalin guy, he thinks he's doing a good thing in the Soviet Union, and he's not. Well, I tend to think all the people being lifted out of poverty, the country becoming a superpower, defeating the Nazis, and H.G. Wells probably says this only because the Soviet Union is an ally of Britain during the war. And he goes on, he says, in the technically crude past, the illiterate have-nots were sweated and overworked. It was easy to find toil to keep them all busy. Such surplus multitudes are wanted no more. Toil is no longer marketable. Machines can toil better with less resistance. These frustrated multitudes have been made acutely aware of their own frustration, and the gap of their always partly artificial disadvantage has been greatly diminished now because they all read. It's a big problem. They all read. Even for incidental unemployment, it has been necessary to teach them to read. And now the reading public thus created and evoked press and literature of excitement and suggestion. The cinema and the radio dazzle them with spectacles of luxury and unrestricted living. They are not the helpless Hodges and factory fodder of hundreds of years ago. They are educated up to what must have been middle-class level in 1889. They are indeed largely squeezed out of the middle class and thus restless, impatient, and seeing extremely dangerous. They have assimilated almost all of what the lower strata that were formerly illiterate drudges. As this modernized excess population, listen to that phrase, excess population. He's a Malthusian. There's too many people in the world, he believes, has no longer any social humility. It has no belief in the infallible wisdom of the rulers. It sees them too clearly. It knows about them and their waste and their vices and their weaknesses with an even exaggerated vividness. It sees no reason for its exclusion from the good things of life by such people. It has lost enough of its inferiority to realize that most of that inferiority is artificial and arbitrary. The eager and adventurous unemployed young are indeed the shock troops in the destruction of the old social order everywhere. They find guidance in the confidence of a party or some inspired champion who organizes them for revolutionary or counter-revolutionary ends. It scarcely matters which. You hear that? It scarcely matters which. He says, these hungry people, these people that realize that they are working class, they have been educated to read, and they realize they're getting screwed, and they realize the rich are not in power because they're better. He says, and he says they form mass movements. They become communists, or they become fascists, or Nazis, or the Irish Republican Army, or the Ku Klux Klan, and so forth. See that? He equates all mass political movements. They're all the same. The essence is a combination of energy, frustration, and discontent. What all such movements have in common is a genuine indignation at the social institutions that have begotten and then cold-shouldered them, a quasi-military organization, and the resolve to seize power for themselves embodied in their leaders. A wise and powerful government would at any cost anticipate and advert the destructive activities by providing various interesting new employment and necessary condition for satisfying the life of everyone. These young people are life, and the rise of the successful leader only puts off the trouble for a time. He seizes power in the name of his movement, and then, when the seizure of power has been effected, he finds himself obliged to keep things going, to create a justification for his leadership, exciting enterprises, and urgencies. This is really, really blatantly scary stuff. But what I want you to understand is that this is the ideology of the ruling class, right? This is Keir Starmer's party, the Fabian Society, right? And, and again, the people equate this with socialism. And I mean, he has a chapter in here called The Inevitability of Socialism. And he believes in socialism, right? Socialism is unavoidable is the name of the chapter. He believes in socialism, but it's not a socialism in which the masses of people are empowered. And it's not a socialism in which society is rationally organized so growth can be unending. It's a socialism where the masses of people are heavily controlled and the economy is organized so we don't have any of those rabble-rousing unrest, right? But what I would like you to understand is that in these writings by H.G. Wells, again, think about what I just read to you about how he equates mass movements of any kind. He says they're all the same. Think about what he says about how violent revolutions never change anything and they're just big explosions of envious rage. And then listen to ContraPoint's video where she talks about opulence. And go and watch. She says the exact same thing, that revolutions are just cries of vengeance, etc. Go and look at it. And also the equating of Nazi Germany with the Soviet Union and the Ku Klux Klan and the Irish Republican Army. All mass movements are bad because mass movements are where the people get together and resist them and don't obey them, right? This is the ideology of the ruling class, right? And this is what they believe. And, when you talk about the World Economic Forum and you talk about the Council on Foreign Relations and you talk about the Rhodes Scholar Program and you talk about the Fabian Society in Britain, and this is what you're talking about. They think there are too many people in the world, and they fear the day that we get together and demand a government that is working in our interests. And they talk of excess population, and they want to control us, and they have set up a global system to try and control us. And they are actively trying to cull the herd because their irrational system doesn't have a place for us at the assembly line. And they equate all mass movements. Now, there's a book called Persecution and the Art of Writing by Leo Strauss. And Leo Strauss was considered the intellectual father of neoconservatism. And Leo Strauss argued that all the great philosophers of history, from the time of Plato and Socrates right up to today, had to write in code because the masses of people, the inferior rabble, would persecute them for what they really thought. And Leo Strauss believed in the noble lie. The noble lie. His favorite television program was Gunsmoke because the good guy wore a white hat and was all good, and the bad guy wore a black hat and didn't have a single redeeming quality, was nothing good about him. And he said that Gunsmoke, a 1950s cowboy TV show, that was how people should be made to understand world politics in America, right? It's very, very much an elitist perspective that views the masses of people as the enemy and equates all mass popular movements with Nazism and death and killing, and says that in order to make sure that the rabble don't get together and form some kind of mass popular movement, we need to mind control them, we need to dazzle them, and we need to drive the population down. right? This is what they believe. And this is what the so-called new left of Susan Sontag and Hannah Arendt, that's what they believe. And this is what the neoconservatives believe also. And this is what Leo Strauss, the father of neoconservatism, believed. This is what Irving Kristol believed. This is what H.G. Wells and the Fabian Society, the socialists of Britain, Keir Starmer, this is what they believe. They believe that the masses of people in their millions are the enemy and that they don't need us anymore. They used to have us working all day and that kept us busy, but now they don't need us working anymore and we're getting upset about it, and we can read too much and we have too much access to information and we see how unfair the world is and it makes us angry, and that if they don't control us, we're going to get together and kick their ass. We're going to get together and drive them out. We're going to get together and take them out of power and threaten their freedom, their great freedom to rule over us. This is what they believe very, very blatantly, right? And this is not a conspiracy theory. This is, go and read Leo Strauss, go and read H.G. Wells. This is what they believe. And is it socialism? H.G. Wells thought it was socialism. Leo Strauss didn't think it was socialism. He thought it was neoconservatism. ContraPoints might think it's socialism, right? I don't know what Susan Sontag thought it was. I don't know what Hannah Arendt thought it was. But this is what they believe. They believe that they must stay on top of the world, and they can see that it is common sense on our part to get together and form mass movements to remove them. And they are absolutely terrified of such mass movements. That's what they believe. And so they have created a vast apparatus for preventing people from joining mass movements. That's what they want. And I mean, I hate to say this, right? It sounds a little bit nuts, but in all honesty, it looks to me like they want you to commit suicide. I mean, they don't want you to be part of a mass movement for sure. And they want to inoculate you against any mass movement. Any mass movement or organization you would join, that's a cult. You're being brainwashed, right? You need to be free. Being free means letting them control your mind. No one can get between your mind and them. That's freedom, right? No community, no organization, no religion, no political ideology. No, they get to control your mind. They get, with the algorithms and all that, they get to decide what you believe. No one can get into their minds. No one can challenge them, right? They want absolute control over your mind. They want to inoculate you against joining any mass movement. And then every so often, they make films and programs. I mean, I talked about 13 Reasons Why. And they had this whole program romanticizing suicide on Netflix. And many people have criticized me for saying that that's what 13 Reasons Why were. They're like, Caleb, you didn't watch it. I watched it. It's an anti-suicide program. No. See, I work in media. Did you know that you cannot report a suicide in media, right? If somebody jumps off the Empire State Building, I am not allowed to do a story on it. You know why? Because it is documented that if you do a news story about somebody jumping off the Empire State Building, 2 or 3 more people are going to jump off the Empire State Building because they saw the story. So ethically, I cannot report on suicides, right? People do kill themselves. And actually, people kill themselves more than they kill other people. The suicide rate is higher than the homicide rate. Did you know that? Most people do not know that the suicide rate is higher than the homicide rate. Why do you not know that? Because media does not report on suicides for ethical reasons, right? So we don't report in media on suicides. So if I can't do a story about man jumped off Empire State Building, tell me how Netflix can do an entire series about a girl who kills herself and makes a bunch of videos about how people were mean to her and makes them all realize how badly they treated her, right? Which is the demented fantasy of a suicidal person, right? That's often people that are suicidal. They think, well, I'm going to show everyone how bad I feel. I'm going to get empathy. It's very sad. It's a demented fantasy of a suicidal person. How can they make a multi-season show all about someone killing themselves and not think that that's going to result in suicide? And there are a number of parents who have come forward and said, my child watched that show and then killed themselves. A number of them have come forward and said that. And I mean, it is not ethical in any conceivable way, right? And they say, well, I watched it. It didn't make me feel that way. Well, sure. I mean, and maybe it wasn't a blatant advertisement, but it very clearly, brings that up. If you do news stories about suicide, if you talk about suicide in depth, if you advertise people doing it, it leads to other people doing it. That is documented. And there's many examples of this. They want you isolated. They don't want you to be part of a group. They don't want you to be part of an organization. And it looks to me like they want you to kill yourself. I mean, if you don't have a community to be part of, if you don't have someone to be connected to, and if you're sitting there watching films about how global warming is going to kill us all and about how everyone's a predator and everyone's preying on you and you're in danger, you're watching true crime all day, or you're consuming on your phone and you're just seeing how depressing and awful the world is, or you're on the internet, with anonymous people being as nasty as they possibly can be. People on the internet are horrible, right? What is the result? Right. And this is social engineering. This is social engineering. This is what they are doing. Right. And this is how these things work. And I'm telling you that there are two ways you can find happiness in this world. This is a line. I started saying this a couple months ago, and I'm sticking with it. I've talked to a lot of people about it, and people say this is some good stuff you got there. You want to be happy. You want to find happiness in this world. There are two ways you can find it. One, love. Connecting with other people. A genuine connection, mutual feelings of care for another person. Having a friend, having a partner, having a family. That's love. Two, creating. Building something. Constructing. Looking at the world around you and taking what's there and improving it and adjusting it. The two ways that you can find happiness are to create and to love. And it seems to me like what they are trying to do to you and me and all of us with Netflix and Twitter and Facebook and all of that is they are trying to mesmerize us into not doing either of those things. Cut off your family members. Oh, what? Your uncle's a Trump supporter? Cut him off. What? Your relative disagreed with you on something? Cut him off. And don't join an organization. That's a cult. That's mind control. Don't join a group. Oh, don't do that. Right? And don't build anything. What's the point? Right? You're wasting. You need to just conserve. Right? You need to use less resources. Use less energy. This is what they think. And again, they see us as the excess population and they want us to go away. And they are coming to terms with the fact that their economic system doesn't work, largely because of the fact that we've gotten too good at industrial production and there's way, way less human labor involved in the process of production than has ever been used before. And they're realizing that their system doesn't have a place for us, and there's more and more of us, and we're not just reading nowadays, but we have access to all kinds of information, and we're realizing how messed up things are, and we are going to come together, and we're going to say, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. There's no reason that technological advancement should be a problem. There's no reason that self-driving cars should be something we're afraid of, should be a curse hanging over the economy. There's no reason for that. Self-driving cars should be awesome. It should mean no one ever has to drive again. Wouldn't that be great, right? Cars drove themselves, but in our system where people support themselves and their only value is renting themselves out to a boss. If they can't rent themselves out to drive a car anymore, they're not going to have a livelihood. That's messed up. That's irrational. We need a rationally organized economy so that human technological advancement and creativity can advance, and living standards can also advance. And that as we invent more and more efficient ways, we invent self-driving cars, we take artificial intelligence to a higher level, as we invent and create, we all get wealthier in the process, and the amount of wealth and abundance in society continues to rise, and we eventually reach a world where there's so much abundance and so much wealth, the very need for a state can fade away, and people can just do what they feel like doing, and we have a world of abundance and freedom based on economic development. That is what we need. We need to rationally plan our economy. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a society where human creativity and ingenuity and ideas are unleashed in the context of a state that controls the means of production and rationally organizes the banks and the economy, the natural resources, to make sure that growth just continues, to make sure that living standards continue to rise. That is what we need, a government of action to fight for working families. Innovationism is what we need. We need a state that will unleash human creative power and overcome the irrationality of our for-profit system so that human creative power can grow and flourish as never before. That is what we need. We need society to rationally organize the means of production so that we can create and build and construct and unleash human creative power to higher and higher levels, to expand across our solar system, to invent new fuel and energy sources, to have more children and a higher population, to build new cities. That's what we need. That's what we need. And it's common sense that we need this. It's common sense that we need this. Folks, I'm writing a small text. I basically wrote it already. It's already written. But I'm going over it. I'm making some changes to it. I'm adjusting. Shout out to Noah, who's been helping me with it. Shout out to Peter Coffin, who's always helping me with all kinds of things. We are in a weird spot. I'll just tell you, folks. So it's funny. I just want to talk about libertarianism for a little while, right? Because I'm not a libertarian. But I find myself getting along with libertarians despite advocating exact opposite of what they believe in terms of economics. When I was in college, I hated libertarians. I really, really did. I could not stand them. And the reason that I could not stand them was it seemed like they were close but no cigar, right? My whole life I'd been arguing with people saying that the Iraq War was wrong, saying that government torturing people was wrong, saying that, all these things that Bush was doing was wrong. And all these people that were Republicans were just like, no, it's good. I trust the president, blah, blah, blah. Well, finally, they all were waking up and saying the Iraq War is wrong. And, and Bush torturing people and spying on people is wrong. But that's because they're all communists and we just need real capitalism. And I was like, no. And I couldn't stand libertarians because they, despite questioning the standard narratives of U.S. society used by the American imperialist state, despite questioning that, they did not ever question any of the standard anti-communist narratives that we get, right? It's funny, they'll question what they say about the war in Iraq. They'll question what they tell us about the vaccine, but no, Stalin killed millions of people. Of course he did. Well, everybody knows that. Oh, communism never worked anywhere. Everybody knows that. Yeah, the Soviet Union was just poor and starving and miserable, and it just infuriated me. It's like you can question everything except like the founding myth of U.S. society, which is the idea that you have to have free market capitalism, right? So I was very frustrated with libertarians. I spent a lot of time arguing with libertarians, but my arguments with libertarians quickly turned into an argument with the communist groups that I was in because they didn't see any merit or value in arguing with libertarians. And I'm saying, look, all these people that used to believe in the war in Iraq are now against it, but they say that the problem is communism. Let's argue with them. And I said, no, let's just build the movement, right? Barack Obama had just gotten elected and we're going to build street heat Jesse Jackson said, we need street heat. We need people in the streets to back up Obama. They did not want to debate against libertarians. They did not want to debate against conservatives. They did not want to debate against these very wrong economic ideas that were out there among people who should become anti-imperialists, and instead were becoming, advocates of free market neoliberalism and, saying that the Federal Reserve was the Communist Manifesto and stuff like that. And I was frustrated more. My frustration with libertarians quickly translated into my frustration with the socialist movement. But fast forward to today, right? Or fast forward to I've been streaming on this channel since 2015, right? I really started streaming here 2015, 2016 is when this channel really got going. I didn't really start doing regular streams until like 2017, 2018. Regardless, as this channel was starting to really blow up, 2018, 2019, 2020, it was during the pandemic, 2020, this channel really blew up. I know that's when the left started hating me, right? That was when all of a sudden I was a Nazi pretending to be a communist. I was all these evil things. One criticism that just kept showing up over and over and over again, especially after I debated Destiny, after I debated all these other people, I would see people say, he argues like a libertarian. I would think, what? Libertarians want total free market capitalism. They have a fantasy that we can roll back imperialism into industrial capitalism. We can go back to the Gilded Age, right? And they want complete government out. I want a popular government that fights for working families. So I'm the opposite of a libertarian. Like, what is this about? But he argues like a libertarian. He argues like a libertarian. He sounds like a libertarian. Why did I sound like a libertarian? What were they actually saying? Well, they were saying he's arguing for economic policies that will create growth and improve people's lives. And you're not supposed to do that. Right? That's not what leftists do. That's what libertarians do. They believe that all this Austrian school and all these free market policies will raise living standards and increase people's lives. And they argue that they will create economic growth for getting the government out of the way. And that's what libertarians believe. Whereas leftists don't care about that. Leftism is not at all interested in seeing your life get better. Leftism is not at all interested in economic policies to improve the country and create growth. Leftism is interested in who's a racist and who's a sexist and who's homophobic and who's a bad person for flushing the toilet too many times and driving a car that's not electric. And leftism is not interested in improving the economy. And the reason I sounded like a libertarian is because libertarians wanted to improve things in the country and they were interested in economics. And I also wanted to improve things in the country and was interested in economics. And that is why I sounded like a libertarian. Now, is that a mind fuck or what? That is an absolute mind fuck. But as I started to realize that to these people I sound like a libertarian, I realized that we are not simply arguing about policy. This is not about capitalism versus socialism. This is not about fascism versus anti-fascism. That's not what this is about. There is a spiritual war going on between forces that want destruction and death and want to roll back the wheels of history, and forces that believe in growth and optimism and hope. And and they wear all different costumes. There are libertarians that are pessimistic and hopeless and awful, and there are libertarians that really want to improve things with libertarian economic policies. There are loads of socialists who have no interest in economics and just want to tear things down and destroy things. And that all the different ideologies and all the different movements have been infiltrated, and there's people wearing all kinds of different labels and hats, but there is a deep spiritual war going on. And the question is, should life expand and grow, or should life decrease? And that is the spiritual war. It's a battle of life versus death. I'll give you a couple examples. One example, the big movie that the Jacobin guy wrote, right? I watched it and it was an awful movie. It held my attention throughout the movie. It was a Netflix movie. It came out a few years ago and it held my attention. I watched it the whole time. And afterwards, I was disgusted by it. It was like a brain worm. I couldn't get out of my mind. Don't Look Up, about the meteorite that's going to hit the earth. And in the movie Don't Look Up, the villain character is played by Meryl Streep, and she's the president, and she's supposed to be Donald Trump. And in her, there's a meteorite coming to hit the earth, and she just tells the people to think positive and don't look up, right? And she actually gives a speech at one point, the villain character, saying that the people that want you to look up, they don't believe in growth, and they don't believe in and she's making it sound like if you believe in economic growth, you want the world to be hit by a giant meteorite and everyone to die, right? It was an anti-growth propaganda film. And somehow believing in economic growth is the same thing as, ignoring a meteorite that's hitting the earth. So there's that. And then I also must say this. In the lead up to the Second World War, this is very important. This is something I've been coming back to over and over again. It's something that I'm starting to realize as I understand how the world works. The world is so much more complicated than I thought it was. But I've studied the history of the 1930s extensively. The Great Depression, the rise of fascism, the communist movement during the 1930s, the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, and the British and political movement and American political movements at the time and all of that. And one thing that I've realized is that in the lead up to the Second World War, every political movement split. Every single one. A great example was in the United States, there was no civil rights movement as we know it at that time, right? This was prior to World War II. Jim Crow segregation was in effect in the South, and the Black community lived in urban centers in the North where they were discriminated against. And among Black people, there was resistance. And there were two, in Harlem, New York City, there were two very big religious movements among Black Americans that were in opposition to how they were treated. And one of those movements was the Nation of Islam. And the Nation of Islam at that time was, saw that, that Japan was a non-white country that was rising and was expanding its influence and wanted to unify Asia. And they were sympathetic to Japan as Japan was rising, and Japan was aligned with the Nazis. And the Nation of Islam was sympathetic to the Axis in the lead up to the Second World War. And then there was another mass Black power religious movement in New York City that was led by Father Divine. And Father Divine worked closely with the Communist Party. And he was a minister who, claimed to be a Messiah. And, he was brought to the United States, a Messiah brought to fight for the liberation of Black people. But he was anti-fascist, and he was aligned with the Soviet Union. And he thought that the Soviet Union was a great country, and he liked Roosevelt. And so, if you were a Black person who lived in Harlem in New York City in the 1930s, and you wanted to fight for Black people, you could fight for them with the Nation of Islam that was sympathetic to the Axis, or you could fight with them with Father Divine, who was sympathetic to the Allies. And let me add, in Britain, there was this big ultra-patriotic movement of young men who, lived together and exercised together and were ultra-patriotic and ultra-conservative. And they were called the British Union of Fascists, the BUF. And all these young men were living together in dormitories, and they wore black shirts, black uniforms, and they followed Oswald Mosley, who was a wealthy British politician. And Oswald Mosley admired Mussolini, and he admired Hitler, and he wanted to build a movement that was ultra patriotic that would create a fascist state in Britain. And he thought the communists were the greatest threat to Britain, and he wanted to crush the labor unions. He was a fascist, the British Union of Fascists, the BUF. So in Britain, another ultra-patriotic movement of young men who lived together and exercised together and made sure each other didn't masturbate and were ultra-patriotic and ultra-conservative was created, and that was called the Oxford Group. And the Oxford Group was anti-fascist. And they said that the Nazis were the enemy and the Soviet Union were the allies. And the Oxford group looked a lot like the British Union of Fascists. They were ultra-patriotic, they were socially conservative, they were whatever, but they were anti-fascist. And then that brings me to the labor movement, right? If you were somebody who believed in labor unions and was involved in fighting for the working class, there was an organization you could join that loved the Soviet Union, that aligned with Roosevelt, and that was called the Communist Party. And they admired Stalin, they admired Roosevelt. And there was another political movement you could join if you liked labor unions that was anti-Roosevelt, that was aligned with the Teamsters, that were a Republican labor union, that was aligned with John L. Lewis, who was also a Republican, leader of the miners' union, and that tried to undermine the war effort. And its leaders were actually thrown in jail because they were trying to sabotage the U.S. military during World War II. And that was the Trotskyites. And we know about Trotsky and the funding of the Trotskyists. We know about their funding, from Japan and Nazi Germany, the fifth column, they were called. And so it wasn't a question, communists are bad. No, there were communists who were on the fascist side, the Trotskyites, and there were communists that were on the Roosevelt-Stalin side, the Communist Party. It wasn't a question of black liberation bad. No, there was a black liberation movement that was on the Stalin side. There was a black liberation movement that was on the Japan side. Right? It wasn't a question of ultra-conservative young men are bad, ultra-conservative masculine young men organizations are bad, because there was an ultra-conservative masculine young man organization that was on the Hitler side, the British Union of Fascists, and there was an ultra-conservative masculine young man organization that was on the British and American and Soviet side, the Oxford group. And this is how the game is played. And we're living in that time right now. Because there are socialists that are on this side, and there are socialists that are on the other side, and there are libertarians that are on this side, and libertarians that are on the other side. There are black liberation forces that are on this side and other side. There are Muslims that are on one side and Muslims that are on the other side. There are Christians on one side. There are Christians. I'm telling you, it's not about ideas. It's about, do you interpret the ideas in a way that promotes life or death? That is the issue. That is the division facing our society. There is a satanic death cult that has seized control of the world that says that the only way they can stay in power is to reduce the population dramatically, roll back the wheels of history, implement a low-wage police state, and march us toward World War III. And there is the bulk of the human race, led by Russia and China, that says, no, we believe in growth and expansion, and we want to see humanity prosper. And every political movement and every religion and ideology and every grouping of people divides. And that's what I'm telling you. And I will tell you that every dissident community and every different dissident space is being manipulated in similar ways. One thing that they do, the way they control these people, is that they create fandoms. And this is a big problem in the libertarian community, right? It's obviously a big problem in the communist community. Not going to say much more about it because I don't even consider myself a communist anymore. What's the point? But in the libertarian community, there are these big influencers who are boosted, who are trying to tear apart the Libertarian Party and who just want to maintain their big social media following. And when the Libertarian Party had its Rage Against the War Machine rally in Washington, D.C. last February, they all went crazy against it because, God forbid, Scott Ritter was going to be there. God forbid, other various people, including the Center for Political Innovation, were going to be there. And all these influencers with big, huge followings who get boosted across social media preaching libertarianism were against that rally happening. This anti-war rally cannot happen. And they do this in every space. They get people that are just big influencers who are not tied to any real organization, who just want to draw you into a fandom And those people are boosted and they declare war on any real organization that is formed, any real organization or community that is actually bringing people together and cultivating a spirit of growth and brotherhood. That they want to tear that apart. And they want you to just stay at your phone, stay home and look at your phone and consume their communities, consume their social media content. All right. That's what they're doing to control dissident spaces right now. And there's many examples of this, and there's elaborate schemes to do this. And then there are people in the libertarian community who really want to stop World War III, who say, you know what, we're going to organize a Rage Against the War Machine rally in Washington, D.C. And you'll notice then all the social media of libertarians goes against them and says, they can't do that. Oh my God. And they get infiltrated and they get sued. And they're dealing with a huge amount of drama. Angela McCurdle, my friend, leader of the Libertarian Party, she is dealing with an all-out campaign to destroy her because she's trying to build a real anti-imperialist movement. And she's trying to position the libertarian movement to be part of the Trump movement, part of the upsurge. And they've targeted her. And this happens in all dissident spaces. This is what I'm telling you, right? It's part of the game. They want you at home. They want you consuming on your phone, and they rig social media to make sure that certain voices get there. And they're always the voices that are not tied to any real organization or any real community. And on top of that, they just pump out negativity. They create an atmosphere where people just, people get paranoid, people get afraid, people get triggered and upset and they get their feelings hurt. And look, it is much harder to have an organization in our time than it ever has been, because there is a whole psychological operation that has been created to keep you at home looking at your phone. Right? And that is what they're trying to do. They don't care. You can be a Nazi, you can be a communist, you can be a Buddhist, you can be a libertarian, you can be a whatever. As long as you just stay home and look at your phone and you don't do anything about it. You don't form a community with other people who believe in it. You don't get together and start having operations with those other people. As long as whatever you do is just a form of passive social media consumption, that's fine. They don't care what you call yourself. You can call yourself a whatever you want. They don't care, as long as you don't do anything about it. As long as you don't get involved, you don't build an organization, you don't build a community, you don't have real relationships with other people, you don't work together to carry out operations, to influence the wider conversation. You just stay in your little social media bubble, stay at home, consuming on your phone, and they're fine with it. And that is the game they are playing right now. They know that getting everyone to agree, like they did back in the 1990s, getting mass public support for their system, that ship has sailed. People don't support the government right now. People don't support the ruling elite. People don't trust the mainstream. They want to make sure that dissident activity becomes a form of passive consumption. And as long as dissident activity is a form of passive consumption, it is not a threat to anybody. And they have the exact same tropes to target all the dissident communities that emerge. And they play the exact same games. I'm not going to go into detail because you've seen them all, and they've played them all against our organization, against the Center for Political Innovation, right? And we pay attention. I pay attention to other dissident communities and other dissident spaces. People that are very different from me, that are at odds with the establishment, get targeted in the exact same way. I'm not going to go into detail about it. Right? And there's really only one way to fight against this. There's only one. There's one way to fight against this, and that is to just make a choice. You have to say, you know what? I'm in this for real. I'm not going to be a passive consumer. I'm going to be part of a movement. And you just have to make a decision. You say, that's what I'm doing. And if you can make that decision and you say, you know what, I might get disappointed, I might get frustrated, things might not go my way, I might have a disagreement with somebody, but you know what, I am making a decision to be part of a movement as much as I can. I might have to work many hours, I might have to drive a long way to be part of these things and all of that, but I am making a decision to be part of a movement. If you make that decision and you stick to it, good things can happen. But if you don't make that decision, if you don't make that solid commitment, you're not going to be in this for real. And I must say, one thing that I have learned to watch out for is people who are really, really excited about CPI at the beginning, right? People who are just so overly enthusiastic because it's like a honeymoon period, right? And then something comes along and something goes wrong, or they have some kind of issue with something, and then there we go, right? And I mean, you got to learn to be patient. People will disappoint you. Life will disappoint you. Things will not go as you hoped, but you got to keep going. Because as I've said many, many times on the streams in recent months, if you want to be happy in this world, there are two ways to find happiness: to love, to connect with other people, to have a relationship, to have friends, to have connections, to love, and to create, to build something, to be part of creating and constructing and building something. The Center for Political Innovation is a vehicle for which you can do that. And so take it or leave it. Take it or leave it. We just created something beautiful. It's not done yet, but it's in the process of being done. I'm not going to say what it is. I thought it would be done by today, but it's not. But that's good, right? You know, great things take a while to create sometimes. And it's not, I don't have the ability to make something awesome like this. I mean, you know, it's really the skills of other people that I'm relying on. And that's the secret. I can't do it all myself, and I shouldn't want to do it all myself. It's a community effort. It's a joint effort. It's about including people. And I am very happy with our community and how people have come together around this latest project. People worked very hard at the very last minute too. And I appreciate it. I really, really do. There's people watching in the chat who are part of this. And I think you're really going to love the finished product. I really do. And I'm not going to expose what it is, but some really, really good things are in the works, and it's a collective joint effort. And I've seen a little bit of what the final product's going to look like, but I haven't seen the final product yet, but I'm happy. I'm happy about it. And we're doing our best to make a contribution. We have a 90-day plan headed to the inauguration, right? The website going up, that was the first thing. And that didn't happen as quickly as I wanted. It took a long time for the internet to update. It kept saying under construction. And then finally, boom, yesterday, the website was up. And the website's up, and you can join CPI. You can become a member. And then this next thing that we're doing, which is still in the works, it's, again, taking a little longer, but that's okay. And then we've got some other things in the works. I mean, a lot of things are happening. A lot of things are happening currently. But all of these things lead to our participation on our outreach on Inauguration Day, to be part of the inauguration, to be there with Trump supporters. And then from there, the plan just gets even better. So we have a plan right now. The reason that the Center for Political Innovation exists is to get shit done. We have shit to do. We have shit to do. The time for fooling around and arguing on the internet, the time for identifying with labels. Really, I mean, I got to just tell you this. I'll just tell you this. You know, if you're upset with me because I've stopped calling myself a communist, right? If that's the deal breaker for you, you didn't get what this was about from the beginning. Because I got to tell you, 99% of people who call themselves communists in the United States don't agree with anything I say. 99% of people who call themselves communists don't support Russia. 99% of people who call themselves communists believe in economic degrowth. 99% of people who call themselves communists are not anti-imperialist, do not understand overproduction. And so would you rather that I was one of them? Right? My beliefs have not changed. My beliefs have not changed. But what I call myself has, for very clear reasons. That I don't, the people in America that are on the right side with me think that what they're against is communism, and they're right, because the communists are the ones against them. And so I gain nothing by shouting at both sides, that's not what communism is. I gain nothing. I gain nothing by doing that. Right? It would be one thing if one side was wrong, but both sides are wrong. The communists are wrong and the anti-communists are wrong, and they share a definition that I don't agree with. Right? And I rather than trying to have an argument with everyone about semantics, I continue to stand for what I've always believed in, which is anti-imperialism, opposing imperialism, and creating vast abundance, rationally organizing the economy so that human growth and creativity is unleashed to higher levels, and that we can move toward that ultimate stage of a stateless, classless world. We need a government of action to fight for working families. That's what I've been saying since I started doing these streams. That's what I've been saying. My views have not changed. But I'm at the point where I don't want to go around associating those beliefs with an aesthetic that offends a lot of people that would like it. And on top of that, identifies and attracts a group of people who don't agree with me. Right? I mean, the people that are attracted to the red flag and the hammer and sickle do not agree with me. And the people that do agree with me are not attracted to the red flag and the hammer and sickle. So I don't gain anything by being a communist. The communists are against the working class. The communists are for imperialism. The communists believe in degrowth. The communists, at this point, there's really no point. There's really no point. We have work to do. We have to build an anti-imperialist movement in America, and we have to do it urgently. Urgently. We must build an anti-imperialist movement in America. So on that note, folks, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Who's with us? Names and locations. Who's with us? Maddie in California. Bob in Troy, New York. Fakido into house. John in Chicago. Auckland, New Zealand. Penny in Minnesota. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Jenny in Cincinnati. Jacob in Wisconsin. Cleveland, Dustin Schlesinger. Ian Chester in England. Alex in Brazil. Ryan in Kansas City. Reed from Cornwall, Illinois. Timoshenko in St. Louis. Brooklyn. Phil High is in the house. Welcome. Patch in Arizona. Ishmael in Los Angeles. Shout out to you, Ishmael. Stephen in Birmingham. Patrick in Maine. Names and locations. Dan in Los Angeles. Hello, innovationists. Jay in Texas. Welcome, Jay. Connor in Colorado. Welcome, Connor. And good job with the thing. Can't tell you what the thing is. You know what it is, but good job. And a lot of people did a great job with the thing. Meredith and Quinn in Washington. Welcome, Meredith and Quinn. Good to have you as always. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Anybody else? Gabby in Chicago, excited for the future. I'm very excited for the future. And the thing, good job also with the thing. And it's looking pretty good. I wish it could be done sooner, but you have to wait for good things. Also, good job with the thing. Everyone on here who was part of the thing, good job with the thing. I was really impressed with the thing, and I'm really going to like it. Dahe in Seattle. Rumbling in the Midwest, Gavin Lockhart. Briggy in Pennsylvania also did a great job with the thing. But listen, so the way this works, I see that there's a number of Rumble rants that have come in, which is good. But there's no super chats yet. Denver in Minnesota. Good. And good job with the thing. I don't want to not say that, right? So people will be like, he's told everyone else they did a good job with the thing, but not me. So Joe in Los Angeles. Welcome, Joe. I'm going to put on this video, but if you have any super chats, that would be great. I see the Rumble rants that have come in. Super chats are also appreciated. I'm going to put on, I made this video as like a compilation of stuff CPI has done lately. It was just a video. I was kind of fooling around online with just different video of different stuff CPI has done. We got the new website and all of this. So I made this video. Just shows you some of the in real life stuff we do. So here we go.
More infrastructure. We need to build up our country. No degrowth. No war in Ukraine. We need to stop all movements toward nuclear war. For my kids, for your kids, for all children in this whole planet. They want to send 17 and 18-year-old poor boys and girls from rural America to go die in a war for Taiwan. Taiwan's a long ways away.
I refer to yet another story. And this is a story that any of us who grew up in the Christian tradition or the Jewish tradition or the Islamic tradition probably had hammered into our heads when we were kids. And the story is about a man named Noah.
To the movies and I go downtown.
Did I say anything about the Center for Political Innovation? I want to, because these comrades were some of the first out of the gate. When this attack happened, they were first out of the gate. They didn't ask any questions or anything like that. They were the first out of the gate, and not only in words. They began to take actions everywhere they were located. We can see the actions they were involved in, defending the Uhuru 3 and opposed to what the FBI was doing.
And the story is that Noah got a message from God that a giant storm was going to come. That storm would be so massive that it would lead to flooding. And so Noah heard this message about a flood, and he started building an ark, started building a ship so that his family and his people would be safe when the flood came.
And we want to see peace, not just with North Korea, but with Russia, with China, with many countries around the world. It is outrageous that billions of dollars is being spent on prolonging the war in Ukraine when our people can't get relief in North Carolina. People are left behind in Georgia and North Carolina. They can't get the relief they need.
She also has some connections to the Center for Political Innovation, which is a very pro-Russian outfit run by a man called Caleb Maupin.
The global imperialist system is oppressing people across the planet, and it's also oppressing people right here. We are against the imperialist system. We are for a new America where working families have what they need.
Support sending billions of taxpayer dollars to Nazis in Ukraine to start a nuclear war with Russia. China is not our enemy.
I need you to leave, please, ma'am.
China's not our enemy. Russia's not our enemy.
Out, please.
No more money for rich men's wars.
Peace with Russia. Peace with China. Peace with Russia. Peace with China. Peace with Russia. Peace with China. We need to reinvest in the United States. We need to stop bailing out these speculators on Wall Street and these creeps who keep sending us to war.
He got this message, and despite the fact that nobody agreed with him, despite the fact that everyone wasn't going along with him, he started building that ark.
With Russia, peace with China, peace 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 with Russia.
Houthis are heroes. Houthis are heroes. Houthis are heroes.
He wrote it in 1927. This is what he wrote. In a very short time, in China's central and southern provinces, several 100 million peasants will rise like a mighty storm, like a hurricane, a force so swift and violent that no power, however great, will be able to hold it back.
They are more concerned about enabling Israel to kill Palestinians than they are in making sure that Americans have hospitals to go to when they're sick or have paved roads.
You want American boys to fight and die? For what? In China? In Taiwan? No. Let's fix our government right here at home to provide for working people.
I went to cover Bernie rallies, talked to Bernie supporters. I talked to Trump supporters at Trump rallies, and I saw the economy, and I saw the stock market, and I saw the suffering. And I said, God damn it, if no one else is going to build a ship, I need to.
Let it shine.
All righty. So if you want to join, you can go to our website, cpiusa.org. You know, we just keep going. We just keep going. Yeah. So on that note, I'm going to start answering people's Rumble rants, and then I will answer super chats. I see we have 2 super chats that have come in. So the first one is Rising Conservatism in Young Men from Leo Messi. I mean, that's kind of an old story, isn't it? I don't know. I mean, hasn't that been going on for quite some time? And there's that whole book, Kill the Normies, by what's her name? The Irish writer, which was about like internet meme culture and how it alienates young men. You know, and I have written a lot about Stefan Molyneux in my book, Where is America Going? I talk about Stefan Molyneux, right? And I talk about Petersonism, Jordan Peterson. And I argue that, you know, Stefan Molyneux really pioneered what Jordan Peterson developed, you know, and that, you know, and that, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I talk a little bit about the conservative, you know, the so-called manosphere of the internet. I talk about that. You know, I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of factors that go into it. I mean, a lot of it is the left focusing on identity politics. That certainly has a lot to do with that. But on top of that, you know, why are young men becoming more conservative? Because young men have expectations on them that young women don't have, right? If, you know, look, I mean, there's no way to say this without making people upset. And I don't want to discount women go through horrible things that men do not have to go through. No man is ever going to be pregnant, right? I'm probably offending some trans person by saying that, but no biological male is ever going to become pregnant. Okay. And so we're never going to have to deal with thinking about maybe getting an abortion. We're never going to have to deal with the pains of childbirth, you know, the experience of having a miscarriage and all of that. Domestic violence. Women suffer domestic violence a lot. You know, rarely you will get cases of women hitting their husbands, but generally it's women. So, you know, there's a lot of awful things that women go through that men don't go through. However, there are also certain things where it's kind of unfair to men that have been amped up by our culture. Number one, here's a great example. If a woman is still living with her parents when she's 30, when she's 25, when she's 35, it's a lot less shameful than it is for a man. That's the truth. But more women go to college than men, and our educational system is more friendly to women than men. And the workplace, women tend to get along in the workplace better than men do. And the workplace laws, and so it's weirder. So even though there's not an expectation for women to work on the same way men do, there's a lot more judgment poured down on a young man who doesn't have a job than on a woman who doesn't have a job, right? If a man is working and his wife is not working, that's respected. If the wife is working and the man is not working, oh, leave that loser. Oh my God, what are you doing with that screw up guy? There's this expectation that the man is supposed to be the breadwinner. The man is supposed to be going out and making all this money. And there's not the same amount of pressure on women to do that. But yet the opportunities have been opened up for women. And in a lot of cases, women have a better chance in places like the university, in places like the office, you know, the what do you call it? The HR, the human resources and all of that, the HR culture. Women are a lot more politically correct than men are. You know, women get better grades in college than men. Women's minds tend to be better at a lot of the spaces out there now. But the expectation is still that men are supposed to be, you know, we expect men to be better than women, right? Right? That's what we do as a society. Men are supposed to make more money than women. Men are supposed to be more high achieving than women and all of that. But our society does not match that at this time because of a lot of things that have changed. Women do better in college. Women do better in workplaces, etc. So a lot of men are in a position where they feel very inadequate and they feel that they are being judged. They are being perceived as failures. They're being perceived as not good enough. That's really common now. And that does a number on people, right? A lot of young men feel that their father thinks he's a failure, feel that their father thinks he's a screw up, right? A lot of young men cannot get girlfriends because they don't have a good paying job. They're still living at home, or they're not successful, or this or that. And, and they're like, hey, women expect them to be high achieving when statistically that's not the case. And there's a lot of ways that being a young man in our time is very difficult. It's very, very difficult. And that a lot of young men feel they are constantly judged, and they feel like they're under pressure constantly to perform well. And that's a really common thing that I see. A lot of young men are feeling like, I have to go out there and impress people. I have to show people how good I am. And because of that, their ability to have relationships is limited, because they feel they're under pressure. They feel they're being judged. They feel they have to perform. They feel they're in a competition with all the other men, and it's a problem. Right? All of these things, it is hard to be a young man. And if you care about this, you're a fascist, according to the left, right? If you so much as say that this is a concern, you're a fascist. You must be a men's rights activist or something, right? I mean, we can't, women are capable of doing bad things. Obviously, men are capable of doing bad things too. Men commit murder at way higher rates. Men are involved in violent crime at way higher rates. So, obviously, men are capable of doing very bad things: rape, domestic violence, human trafficking. Men do awful things, but women aren't incapable of harming people, right? They are not incapable of harming people. Women are not incapable of being cruel, or being indifferent to other people's suffering, or being dishonest, or being manipulative, and there is a culture in leftist spaces that you're not allowed to acknowledge any of these things. One thing, I'll just throw this out there. For a lot of men, the believe women thing is very triggering. Now, obviously, for a lot of women who have been assaulted and no one's taken it seriously, they obviously feel different. But I'll tell you, right? People say, well, Caleb, women don't lie about getting raped. That rarely happens. And they're right. That rarely happens. It has happened, right? There are women who lie about being raped, lie about being sexually assaulted, but it doesn't happen very much, but it does happen. Rarely. But what have many men experienced? Many, many men have experienced a situation where they find a woman attractive, or they want to interact with a woman. And so they say hello to her, or they do something, and they don't break the rules in any way. And the woman doesn't call the police, and the woman doesn't report them and make it a crime, but she brags to all her friends, oh my God, that creepy guy was trying to talk to me. Oh my God, I think he was sexually harassing me, right? Because what she's saying to all her friends is, look how attractive I am. But she's trying to say it in like a subtle way where she can not own it, And so she's going around, oh my God, that creepy guy was talking. And many men have experienced that, where they didn't do anything wrong, and they didn't make any sexual advances or anything, but they just interacted with a woman, and the woman then makes a show of pretending to be victimized by it because she wants to get attention from the other women. She wants the other women to perceive her as attractive. And for a man to perceive that is a very painful, humiliating experience to have that happen, right? To experience that is a very unpleasant thing. And so when you say believe women, there's a lot of men who, again, believe women is not about that. It's not about but that's what immediately flashes into their mind of the day that, the woman in their college class dropped her calculator and they picked it up and gave it to her. And then he overheard her, walking out of class talking about, oh my God, he was hitting on me. I think he was looking at my boobs, That's an experience a lot of young men have had. And when they hear everyone say, oh, you got to believe women, they immediately think of that experience and they get angry because that woman was lying when he handed her the calculator, or he said, have a nice day or whatever, and she went and decided to brag to all the other women, oh my God, he was harassing me, right? And it's that causes a lot of rage, right? This is one thing. This is just a vague thing. This isn't related to gender. One thing I've learned to think about is that, I'm on here talking, right? And I could say tree. When I say tree, I can guarantee you, of all the well over 100 people watching, every one of you has a different picture of a tree in my mind, in your mind, right? And that we all have our own unique associations with words, with colors, with senses. We all have our own memories. We all have our own associations. You know what I'm saying? And because of that, things are going to strike us differently. And you can say, well, that man shouldn't feel that way, because that's not what believe women means, Caleb. Believe women doesn't mean that woman who made a show of calling him creepy is justified. Believe women means that the woman who got raped and no one believes her and all that. Yeah, that's what it should mean. But that's not what his experience was. In his mind, he's associating it with something. And that's something that people have to watch out for. You can be right. You can say, I'm right, but that doesn't change the way that guy feels, right? When that guy hears believe women, he's going to think of that time he got mistreated, right? And there's many things like that, right? That if you say, here's a great example, right? Right? I love Fred Goldstein. I love his economic writing. But in this book, he says something very stupid in this book. And he attacks the phrase working families. Part of the reason I always use working families is because I remember thinking about this and just realizing how dumb it is. But during the 1990s, the labor unions, the SEIU and the AFL-CIO, realized they did polling data, and they realized that if you say working families rather than working people, people sympathize with that more. Why? Because a family is a group. Everyone wants to be part of a family. You think of your parents, your brother, your sister. Family seems like something you want to take care of, right? And that's why conservatives in the 1990s, they talked about family values. And that was a really popular thing. That was one thing that conservatives, they realized if you said to Americans, do you believe in family values? They said yes, because everyone wants to have a family. Everyone thinks families are good. Well, Fred Goldstein, in this book, he talks about working families being a reactionary phrase because he argues it's somehow anti-LGBT. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Gay people have families. Gay people have brothers and sisters. Gay people have moms and dads. Gay people even adopt kids nowadays. The phrase working families is not anti-gay, right? But in Fred's mind, it is. And in the tiny minority of communist activists in Fred's little political sect, family is code for right-wing anti-gay. And so in Fred's mind, family means bad. Well, to 99% of people in this country, family is a good thing. And Fred had a family. I'm sure he's not against families, but in his mind, family was a right-wing code word. To most people, family is a good thing. And you have to think about the word family, right? What does it conjure up? For most people, the word family conjures up very good feelings. And that's why conservatives started talking about family values. And that's why, the labor unions started talking about working families. It's just common sense. You got to think about what image comes up. And that's a really important thing. And if you're writing or you're speaking, you have to think about what comes up in people's minds when you say certain things. And you can say to me, this is what should come up in people's minds. Okay, but that's not what's always going to come up in people's minds, right? And that part of the art of communication is considering that. And so a lot of what considers itself to be left is things that men, young men, older men feel uncomfortable. It doesn't appeal to them. It doesn't. And you can say that doesn't matter. Well, that's because they're racist. That's because they're sexist. Maybe they are. But if you want to win them over, if you want to get them to not be racist or sexist, if you wanted them to change their views, you've got to appeal to them somehow. And that's the thing that the internet, nobody wants to do that on the internet. Nobody on the internet wants to engage in a rational conversation. It's all about how can I put on the loudest, biggest show for people who already agree with me? How can I be as outrageous and emotionally pumped up for people who already take my position as possible, right? If I am for abortion, I put the most shrill, over-the-top tweet or video out there in favor of abortion, and all the people that are in favor of abortion, the millions of them, all share it, and then I win the internet. But you know what? I didn't change the mind of a single person who's against abortion. And that doesn't matter. And that's how the internet works. It's not about actually having a rational conversation and changing people's minds. It's about making the most outrageous show for people who already agree with you. And that is toxic. And that is why I don't want to win the internet. And I'm not interested in winning the internet. And I mean, it's great. I like that when more people watch these streams. I like when my books that I write sell. I like getting attention here and there. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to build a real community, and I'd like to educate people and win people over. And I need to communicate with people that are not in my little bubble. And that's what I'm trying to do. And so that means that I'm not going to win the shrillness contest, right? Which is what a lot of people are doing. But anyway, that was my long answer to the right-wing young man. Thank you, Leo Messi. All right. Hempcar says, Yuful Noah Harari says the human species will split into two. Transhumanists want to end the human race. Well, that's what, that's what's his name? H.G. Wells was talking about, right? He said the bourgeoisie and the proletariat would evolve into two different species. That's what he was arguing about. And I mean, H.G. Wells, he calls himself a socialist, but he's one of the most anti-working class people. I will say that Stalin's interview with H.G. Wells is very good. H.G. Wells interviewed Stalin, and there's an audiobook of that online. There's multiple audiobooks of it. It's really good. Stalin and H.G. Wells, it's H.G. Wells and Stalin. They have this meeting of the minds where Stalin just kind of lays it all out there for H.G. Wells. That's very, very, very good. So there we go. So did the Fabians hijack the term socialist? Who and when was the term first used? And how was Chomsky and the Koch brothers both libertarian? All right. Well, that's Hempcar. We'll just go over the facts. The word socialism was first used in French, and it was followers of Henry Saint-Simon. Henry Saint-Simon was a French Christian, and he, capitalism had emerged from feudalism. The French Revolution had happened, and the world was still very unequal. And there was this Christian named Henry Saint-Simon, and he went around feeding people and taking care of people. And, he saw that the world was very unjust, and he was against liberalism. He thought that the new world that came out of feudalism had too much individual in it. And so as individualism, liberalism or individualism was kind of the prevailing beliefs of the new order in France. And so Henry Saint-Simon's followers started saying, we believe in socialism with an E on the end, which was, liberalism is for the individual. Socialism is for the collective. It was a very vague thing. He started some collectively owned factories. He fed hungry people, and he was just a French thinker. And after Henry Saint-Simon, there was a guy named Robert Owen. And Robert Owen was a wealthy factory owner in Scotland. And Robert Owen, he was a wealthy factory owner, but he just saw the conditions that working people were in, and he wanted to do something. So he built a little commune in New Lanark. And it was like a cooperative, like a commune, right? Where the workers, they shared everything. It was like a worker commune city. And after a while, Robert Owen said, you know what? We're going to come to America. And he moved to Indiana, and he set up a town called New Harmony, Indiana. And it was like a cooperative socialist town. And Robert Owen was the first person in the English language to use the word socialism. And he actually was invited to the U.S. Congress, and he gave a speech around in the aftermath of the U.S. Civil War, 1860s, 1870s. He gave a speech to the U.S. Congress explaining socialism, which was his idea. And if you read Socialism, Utopian and Scientific by Frederick Engels, he goes over, he talks about Henry Saint-Simon, he talks about Robert Owen, and he talks about there were all these people, and there was a lot of people all over Europe that were saying, hey, this new capitalist system exists, but a lot of people are left behind. The Frankenstein. I don't know if you've ever read Frankenstein. Frankenstein, a great novel, I think. Frankenstein was a novel that was published the year that Karl Marx was born, and it was written by Mary Shelley. And Mary Shelley was married to the poet Shelley, who was a famous poet, and her mother was Mary Wollstonecraft, who was an advocate of the rights of women, a feminist. And Mary Shelley, she wrote a novel called Frankenstein that was like a sensation. It was one of the most popular books in like 1818. And it told the story of a scientist who makes a man of his own. He makes a man in the laboratory. And he makes a man, and the man that he makes turns out into a big monster that terrorizes the world. And the reason that he makes the man in the laboratory and the man turns into a monster is because he never gives this man that he makes in a lab, he never gives him any love or care. He never gives him any compassion or kindness. And he's so caught up in, Dr. Frankenstein is so caught up in playing God. And he keeps saying, I want to be God. I know what it's like to be God. He's so caught up in his technological advancement. Oh my God, I'm going to make a person. He doesn't think about that person that he makes. And he has no empathy for that person. So that person becomes a monster. And that was the criticism of capitalism. Wow, we've got railroads. Wow, we've got electric lights, but we got sweatshops and people are being worked to death. Oh, but people are starving on the streets. Oh, I mean, it was like we've lost our humanity. We were so caught up in human progress, but we're not taking care of people. And that was the early criticism of capitalism. That's Robert Owen, Henry Saint-Simon, and others. And Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is an anti-capitalist piece, and that many people see it as anti-science. It's not anti-science. It's just saying that it's a criticism of the Industrial Revolution and saying that in this wave of technological progress, we lost our souls. We stopped thinking about people along the way. It's actually a very profound work. And that was socialism originally emerged as just kind of people saying, look, capitalism doesn't care about people. There's a big problem. This brave new world, we overthrew feudalism. We have the right to freedom of assembly and freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And we've got new technology, but something's still wrong. And so what do we do about it? That's where the word socialism comes from. It was originally in French. And so it was first used in French by Henry Saint-Simon. After that, it was used by Robert Owen, who was the first person to use it in English. Now, the next part is, how is Chomsky and the Koch brothers both libertarian? Well, libertarian is an adjective originally. It's not a noun, right? Now it's a noun, right? You can be a communist, you can be a Democrat, you can be a Republican, you can be a libertarian. Libertarian was originally an adjective, and it meant it meant a state of advocating for freedom, right? If you were an authoritarian teacher, you had really strict rules in your class. But if you were a libertarian teacher, you let the kids do whatever they want, right? If you were a libertarian was the opposite. Libertarian was the opposite of authoritarian. You could have an authoritarian approach or a libertarian approach. And around the time that socialism and communism and the labor movement was emerging, it was common to refer to leftist politics, socialist politics, radical politics as libertarian politics, because it was advocating lawlessness, revolt, rebellion, people rising up against authority. So people said, well, this is a libertarian movement, right? The traditional conservatives were the authoritarians, and the left were the libertarians. They were talking about liberty and freedom, and that's it was originally an adjective. Now, libertarianism, as we understand it now, is people who advocate market liberalism. Well, so really, and I wrote a paper about this recently. This is a part of the little pamphlet I wrote to explain why I'm not a communist anymore. I'm an innovationist. I wrote a section about various other anti-imperialist trends. I just wrote the section on libertarianism today to finish the pamphlet off. Libertarianism is a merger of two different political trends in the United States. It is the old right wing before neoconservatism, the factory owners, the John Birch Society, the people who think that the Rockefellers and the big monopolies are communists, the people that thought there was a communist conspiracy in the government, and that they wanted total deregulation of the economy. It was the old right, the John Birch Society. And then you had the 1960s new left, which was not really focused on economics, but was focused on sexual freedom, was focused on drugs. Drug culture was a big part of it. And so in the 1970s, a new political party was formed that combined the economics and the anti-government and the anti-establishment sentiments of the old right with the social liberalism and the cultural revolution of the 1960s. They were pot smoking, free love, but also anti-big government, free market, anti-communist. It was a new political current that combined the social liberalism of the 1960s with the economic neoliberal free market stuff and anti-communism of the old right. And the Koch brothers started investing heavily in it in the 80s because they were using it to lobby Ronald Reagan, because the Republican Party reinvented itself, right? And, became the party of neoconservatism. And a big part of neoconservatism was the religious right, which was not in favor of personal freedom. The war on drugs, that was a big thing in the Reagan administration. War on drugs, tough on crime, social conservatism, outlaw pornography, outlaw homosexuality, right? That was a big thing. And the religious right was a big part of the Ronald Reagan conservatism. And the Koch brothers supported Ronald Reagan, but they didn't agree with him. They supported Ronald Reagan because they believed in his economic policies, but they had a very different philosophy than he did. And so Ron Paul was a member of Congress who was from the old right. He was a John Birch Society guy. He was not a member of the John Birch Society. They basically got him elected, and he was first elected to Congress during the early 60s, I believe, and he came in as a John Birch Society guy, as an old right John Birch Society kind of far right guy. And Ron Paul and the Koch brothers kind of used, the Libertarian Party was not a serious political party. They weren't going to win elections. It was there to make a statement, to tell Ronald Reagan, okay, we don't agree with neoconservatism. We don't agree with wars around the world to fight communism. We're non-interventionist. We want to emphasize personal individual freedom. So we're and Ron Paul was a Republican, right? And, the Koch brothers were Republicans, but the Libertarian Party was funded by them as a way to kind of put out their own message, which was separate from neoconservatism. It was a way of saying, look, we're backing you up, Ronald Reagan, but we have an independent election campaign to make a statement because we don't agree with a lot of what conservatism is. And so that's what it was. And libertarianism has gone through a lot of leaps and evolutions. And right now, anyway, I could go on about that all night, but, right now, libertarianism kind of represents people, that are that are at odds with the imperialist ruling class, and they are, people that represent layers of the capitalist class in tech largely, but in other fields that are at odds with imperialism. They're at odds with the way imperialism is functioning, with the imperialist monopolies in their state. So there you go. All right. Rainer Shea showed concerns about Tulsi Gabbard and her comments on Palestine protests. Rainer's my good friend, and people can have differences in their analysis of events. It's fine. Rainer's a good guy. We don't have to agree about everything. What's next? Is that the last Rumble rant? Should we go on to super chats? I think that was the last Rumble rant. Okay, yes, that's the last Rumble rant. So now we're on to super chats. Did NATO destroy Yugoslavia? Well, the book that I recommend about the destruction of Yugoslavia that I learned the most from is called To Kill a Nation by Michael Parenti. And I have it around here somewhere. And I would recommend reading To Kill a Nation, The Rational Destruction of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was the first communist government to cut ties with the Soviet Union. Yugoslavia, it's a complicated thing. They did the worker self-management, which they presented as being much more revolutionary, but it was actually, they didn't, they basically had factories that functioned like collective farms. And, that was kind of it later kind of inspired a lot of what Deng Xiaoping did, but it also, It also, may have contributed to playing the different nationalities against each other at the time of the fall of Yugoslavia. But there's a couple different books on that I would recommend. To Kill a Nation by Michael Parenti is very good. I would also recommend War, Lies, and Videotape, which was published by the International Action Center. There's a number of books. I used to work for the International Action Center for Ramsey Clark, and they did a lot of great work on Yugoslavia. And, the UN has admitted now that there were atrocities committed in the Serbian civil war, but, there was not genocide. Milosevic did not commit genocide. There were atrocities. He did not commit genocide. Did Hezbollah slaughter Syrians in Madaya? Look, there's a lot of atrocities that have gone on, and I can't speak to that particular case, but a lot of instances in that part of the world where people who've been killed shouldn't have been killed. And I don't know the specifics of that particular situation that you're talking about. And I don't want to deny that something happened that, maybe there was something that did happen and people got hurt, but I also don't want to repeat what might be smears and lies against somebody. And I just haven't researched. I don't even know about this Madaya situation. So I'll have to Google it and do some research and all of that, but I'm not prepared to answer you because I just don't know about the situation tonight. And I don't want to, it's important, we don't ever want to get into the state of mind where just because we consider some country to be anti-imperialist or whatever, that we just assume they're innocent. We don't, right? Anti-imperialist countries do bad things. But that's not the whole story. And that the bad things that anti-imperialist countries and forces do are often very exaggerated. And the good things they do are ignored. And that, there's wild, over-the-top smears and allegations against every anti-imperialist state. But that said, there are many instances of things like the Cultural Revolution, that were awful. Things like Pol Pot and what he did in Cambodia. There are people that are in an anti-imperialist position, that do bad things. So I don't know about the case, Brutus. All right. Why do you think the division between Trump and the establishment Senate, if they had a public vote, Scott, would have been, there's a big divide between the Trump faction of the Republican Party and the Republicans that have been there from day one, the MAGA Republicans. That's really obvious. There's Trump Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene, like Matt Gaetz, like, Tulsi Gabbard. And then there's Mitt Romney, and most of the Republicans in Congress are pre-Trump Republicans. Now there's a MAGA faction that's pretty big and pretty powerful. And Jimmy Dore was correct, because that MAGA faction has used their power to get what they want, right? And block, the block secretary or block speakers of the House and stuff like that. And all that Jimmy Dore did was say that AOC and the DSA Democrats should do the same thing. And Jimmy Dore got, his name smeared and run through the mud for suggesting that they do the same thing. And that the MAGA Republicans, they have the ability as a faction of the Republican Party to, on issues like Ukraine, they have done some very heroic things. Good for them. And all Jimmy Dore did is that when the squad got in there, when AOC and all them got in there and they said they believed in Medicare for all, he said they should put up a fight for it. And they didn't. And they didn't. And not only that, but Jimmy Dore was raked through the coals, raked through the mud for daring suggest they do such a thing. So there you go. Why do you still think scientific socialism is better than utopian socialism if you reject dialectic materialism and atheism, not a communist? Well, you're putting a lot of words in my mouth. First of all, I think that what was the difference between Marx and the socialists that existed at the time? What was the difference between Marx's scientific socialism and utopian socialism? You read it. Utopian socialism thought that you could build like a model community that would just show everyone how great socialism was, and that socialism would come about through arguments and appeals to reason and building little model communities. And Marx said, no, socialism is going to come about by the labor movement, the working class, and their struggle with the factory owners is going to lead to a confrontation, and out of that confrontation will come socialism. And Marx was wrong. That didn't happen, right? The Marxist movement became the most popular form of socialism, and it built the labor unions. And what happened? Capitalism expanded into monopoly capitalism and imperialism, and socialism did not come into the world as a result of the labor movement. Socialism came into the world as a result of countries around the world wanting to break out of imperialist domination. So, I mean, Marx's prediction that socialism would result, that capitalism in the West would become more and more unstable because of the economic problems that I pointed out there, the problem of overproduction and all of that. And that would lead to the gap between the rich and poor in the capitalist countries getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then that would lead to the workers in the capitalist countries just rising up and seizing the means of production. Well, Marx didn't factor in imperialism, and that the big monopolies would start expanding, and that they'd be able to buy off a layer of the labor movement at home and make it non-revolutionary and reformist, and that ultimately it would be countries around the world that are kept poor by imperialism, that aren't even able to become fully capitalist, breaking free and having to rationally organize their economy, and have a planned economy in order to develop. That is how socialism would come into the world. So, I mean, I don't like the term scientific socialism, and I've criticized it on these streams before because it's I've seen, communists, it is a classic caricature of communist rhetoric to overuse the word science. With our scientific understanding, with our great science of Marxism, our science. Look, science means you're doing an experiment. You got a control group. You got you're not. It's Marx called it scientific socialism because back then everything that was new and exciting was scientific, and also the other socialist movements had made religious appeals or moralistic appeals, and he was saying, well, it's actually based on my analysis of how history works that we're going to have socialism come into being. Right? That's what Marx was saying. Let me just say this. I understand this way more than any of the idiots on the internet who are denouncing me for not using the label communism. I understand their ideology about 10 or 20 times more than they do, right? And does that matter to them? No. All that matters is what label you put on yourself. And even that shouldn't even matter. But, when I say I reject dialectical materialism, I have said I do believe spiritual forces do exist. I mean, obviously material forces exist, and material forces are the primary thing, right? I mean, spiritual ones are feelings and all of that, but the material world is right there and is indisputable. I mean, math problems, etc. But that doesn't mean that there aren't spiritual forces. And I think there are. Dialectics, the idea that confrontation and struggle is the only way. Well, confrontation and struggle is a very big way that things change, but it's not the only way. And I think there's way too much confrontation and struggle. And I want to heal and reconcile people in our time. So I'm not discounting. It's like when you say that, why do you still think scientific socialism is better than it's part of our history. It's the foundation. ML is the foundation, right? I mean, look, there would not have been an anti-imperialist global movement if it hadn't been for ML. ML laid the foundations, but ML was part of the puzzle, but it wasn't the whole thing. ML points to some very important truths. And the point that I make is the truths, there are certain truths of ML that I still believe that none of the communists believe. And that's the crazy thing. And that's, in the piece that I wrote, which will be published soon, it'll be available, me explaining why I no longer use that word. There are 4 essential truths of Marxism-Leninism that I hold on to that, I say we preserve the revolutionary essence of Marxism-Leninism. These are 4 things that we believe that communists no longer believe. And it's weird, right? Because they're holding the label, and 99.9% of the people that believe in communism do not believe in these 3 things that I consider to be an essential part of ML, right? That I believe, right? I am more pure in being a Marxist-Leninist than these people are. And I don't want to use the label because I don't want to be associated with these people who don't use it, right? I think Jesus was more correct in his understanding of what the Hebrew prophets taught But in order to have his interpretation, he had to stop calling himself a Jew, and his movement had to call themselves Christians. But I think that he was correct in following their teaching. But let me just explain, right? Number one, Marxism-Leninism is anti-imperialist. It says that the imperialist system is the main impediment to growth and human progress, and that all anti-imperialist forces must be supported. I believe that. Lenin said that. Stalin said that. That's a foundational aspect of Marxism-Leninism. But communists don't believe that anymore, right? The overwhelming majority of people with hammers and sickles and all of that, they think Russia's imperialist. They think China's imperialist. They think imperialism is a policy. They hate anybody around the world who's anti-imperialist, who doesn't measure up and is not, the right kind or whatever. The idea that, the Bolsheviks funded the Emir of Afghanistan because he was fighting against the British Empire. And even though he was a conservative monarchist, he was fighting the British Empire. And when the British Labour Party was trying to colonize Egypt and oppress Egyptian capitalists who were fighting against the British Empire, the Bolsheviks supported the Egyptian capitalists against the socialist British Labour Party because they're against imperialism, right? There's quote after quote, and I include all the quotes in what I'm writing. Imperialism is the main issue. Are you for imperialism? Are you against it? That is a central point of Marxism-Leninism, and none of these communists believe that. None of them. None of them believe that. So I am holding on to that aspect of Marxism-Leninism that these people have rejected. What else? Marxism-Leninism believes in economic growth. Marx makes it abundantly clear the problem with capitalism is overproduction, tendency of the falling rate of profit, the irrationality of the market, etc. And that the point of socialism is to rationally organize the economy so you can have economic growth and so you can reach the ultimate goal of a world with vast abundance, etc. I believe that. Communists don't believe that. The overwhelming majority of communists in America think the problem with capitalism is that it creates growth. They think there's too much growth. Growth is bad. Degrowth, a world beyond capitalism. They don't believe in growth. Right? I do. Marxism-Leninism pretty clearly believes in that. I believe in that. They don't. What else? Marxism-Leninism has no loyalty to the left. And that's a really important point. During the early 1930s, the communists focused on opposing the Social Democrats. And they said the Social Democrats were the main danger. They called them social fascists. And Stalin made alliances with Henry Ford and General Electric and a lot of conservative capitalists. And the followers of Stalin and the communist movement around the world focused on opposing social democracy, the left, because they were the main threat. And then, after the rise of Hitler and fascism, they aligned with the Social Democrats, and they aligned with the left against the right because fascism was the main threat. They have no loyalty to either the left or the right of imperialism. They do what is in the interest of advancing anti-imperialism around the world and defeating imperialism. And sometimes that aligns with the left, sometimes that aligns with the right. I still believe that. And I believe right now we need to align with the right. We need to align with Trump. Communists do not believe that. Communists always think that whatever the left is, they are just the more extreme version of that. Right? If you're a Democrat, you're left. If you're a Republican, you're right. And if you're really a Democrat, if you're a super duper Democrat, you're a communist. Bullshit. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. And I've been to actual communist countries, and they are not into the trans thing. They are not into gay marriage, and they are not into, woke, but, there you go. I have no loyalty to the imperialist left or right, and I will align with either one based on what will advance the struggle against imperialism. These people, on the other hand, are loyal to the left. So there you go. Oh, what else? One more point. Marxism-Leninism seeks to create a planned economy. That's the point. The banks, factories, and the industries are organized to serve public good, not the profits of a wealthy few. Communist Manifesto: centralize all the instruments of production into the hands of the state to increase productive forces as rapidly as possible. Communists in the West and in America do not believe that. They believe in taxing the rich to abolish billionaires. They believe in worker cooperatives. They believe in redistribution of income. They believe in all the white people leaving North America and it being given back to the Native Americans. They believe in land back. They believe in reparations. They believe in everything but that. And if you say to them, hey, we want to centrally plan the economy, they say, you're a fascist. So those are 4 essential aspects of Marxism-Leninism that I believe that communists do not believe. Communists do not believe in anti-imperialism. Communists do not believe in economic growth. Communists do not believe in, communists have loyalty to the imperialist left, which I do not have, and communists do not believe in a planned economy. So those are 4 things where I am more Marxist-Leninist than any of the communists out there that are. Now, where do I disagree? Where do I disagree with communism? Well, there are some other things that I disagree with. Number 1, dialectical materialism. I do not believe in dialectical materialism. I believe in God. I believe in healing and reconciliation. I believe in the power of the human will and intention. I don't believe that thought is inseparable from matter that thinks, and that there are no spiritual forces, and that ideas are just a reflection of material reality. No, I believe in I don't believe all change comes through struggle. I am not a dialectical materialist. What else? What else? Where do I disagree? I think there are many examples of socialist societies around the world that are not Marxist-Leninist. Like, the first one I think was Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. He created a socialist government, but he rejected Marxism-Leninism. He called it African socialism. I think it was socialist. Arab socialism in Egypt, Baathism in Syria, in Iraq, the Islamic Revolution of Iran. It calls itself not capitalism, but Islam. It's a state-run economy. Gaddafi's Libya, right? There's many examples of state-run anti-imperialist planned economies that are not Marxist-Leninist. This idea that, oh, you have to say you're a Marxist-Leninist. I mean, in Tanzania, right? Julius Nyerere had a Juma, African socialism, the Bolivarian countries, right? I mean, there's many, many, many examples. Many, many examples of socialism that is not Marxist-Leninist, right? Well, Marxist-Leninists tend to think that only countries run by ML communist parties of the Soviet variety can create socialism. That's absurd. That's absurd. I believe the market has a role in a socialist country. And if you go to any socialist country nowadays, including Marxist-Leninist ones like Vietnam, like China, like Cuba, like North Korea, they all want to have a market sector. They all want to have private business that functions as part of their planned economy. And Nicaragua is very successful with their micro-entrepreneurship program. And China and Vietnam, Vietnam is very successful with its socialist-oriented market economy. All of the anti-imperialist and socialist states they have a market sector, and they want to have a prosperous market sector. And this idea that that's revisionism or a deviation, yeah, if you read Stalin, that's what he says, but he's wrong, and I'm just, people that think, China, I just don't agree with, I just don't agree with the notion that you can't have a market in socialism, right? And that is part of classic ML, and I disagree with it. Finally, I don't agree with democratic centralism. I think democratic centralism worked really, really great in Russia in 1905, but it's an awful way for running a political organization in the United States. It leads to a situation where the only reason Marxism-Leninism works is because it's a situation where people feel compelled to stay in the same organization because the organization is in a military situation and whatever. But when people are joining political parties based on what they feel, based on a desire to make a contribution or whatever, democratic centralism just leads to, I disagree. Well, I'm not allowed to disagree in the group, so I better start my own group. It's a disaster. The final deviation from Marxism, I do not claim Comintern lineage. I don't, right? I don't think that if Marx were alive today, he would join the Center for Political Innovation. I think he would say, no, I'm a dialectical materialist. A lot of your people believe in God. I don't care. I don't give a fuck. I don't care if Marx would join my group. I care, is my group doing what's needed to oppose imperialism? If Lenin were alive today, would he join my group? I don't care. I don't give a fuck. I mean, maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. I don't care. Is my group doing what needs to be done? I am not, it's like religion, right? Every religion, right? There was the Catholic Church, and then it split to the Orthodox Church, and then you had the Protestant Reformation. Every Christian religion can trace its roots back to we're starting it completely new. CPI is a new organization. Innovationism is a new political formulation, and we study ML, and Marxism-Leninism, and we study Marxism, and we study LaRoucheism, and we study all kinds of different things, and we're doing something completely new and different because we want to figure out something that works in this country. I am not a split from a split from a split. I do not claim that, that I can trace my lineage back to, and if Marx were alive today, he would sign up and join my group. I don't think that. No, I am a socialist. I'm an anti-imperialist. But I mean, am I the one true inheritor of the holy sacred line? No. And that kind of political thinking is stupidity. Okay? It is, right? That's not how serious political movements operate. That's how deranged sects operate, right? Deranged sects holding on to the pure line. I'm not, right? So those are the ways that, yes, I have strayed from Marxism-Leninism. I mean, dialectical materialism is central, and I reject it. The market is not supposed to exist. Well, I think it's necessary. There are ways in which I have completely deviated from the Marxist-Leninist ideology, but I have preserved the revolutionary essence of Marxism-Leninism, which is anti-imperialism, which is economic growth, which is no loyalty to the imperialist left or the right, which is the struggle to create a planned economy. And none of the other groups believe in any of that. Those are the essential things. If you read ML, that's what the essential thing of what they were fighting for. And none of these communists who can quote Marx and they can show you their silly communist sailor hat, and they have their reading group where you got to read 60 pages every week. And, I'm just telling you, none of these fools believe in those things. I do. So I am holding on to what is the revolutionary essence of ML, but I'm breaking with the other stuff that I don't agree with anymore, and that we have a new formulation, and we do not claim that this formulation is the pure interpretation, because it's not, right? We are doing something new. We are doing something new. So there we go. All right. Next question. Anarchism versus libertarianism. Anarchism is a form of socialism, right? So generally, among Marxists, right, I shouldn't say Marxists, among the classical socialist movement that existed, there are three currents. The first current is called social democracy. And social democracy is the idea that, that the labor movement in Western capitalist societies will eventually get elected and take control of the government and gradually create a society ruled by the working class and planned economy, right? Socialism one step at a time. And social democracy is gradual. It doesn't believe that there's like an event horizon. There's a revolution where the workers take power. It's more just like it's a gradual one step at a time. And social democracy is also it's pro-imperialism. It says that Western imperialism is good. The West is the most advanced, etc. That's social democracy. Then there's ML, communism, whatever. And ML says imperialism is the enemy and it wants to build a united effort against imperialism. ML says you have to seize control of the state. There is a revolutionary event where the state changes hands. It's about, creating a new revolutionary state. Bolshevism, ML, etc. Then there's another school of thought that they called the ultra-left. And they argued that socialism could not be created with state action at all. And they argued that, they rejected all political activism. There was the biggest current was called syndicalism, which believed that communism would come about through the labor movement, right? Which was the idea that the workers would fight their individual employers and eventually they would seize the factory from the employers, right? And there'd be a great general strike, and they were not interested in changing laws, and they wouldn't sign contracts with their bosses, and it was purely a labor union struggle. That was syndicalism. That's one school of anarchism. There are other schools of anarchism that argue that we just have to build little cooperatives and communes, and that the system will just kind of collapse, and people will voluntarily create these kind of voluntary associations in the ruins of the old society. But anarchism was a section of the socialist movement that rejected all government involvement in revolutionary government, that government was not involved in the process of creating socialism, right? Social democrats wanted to gradually reform the government. Communists wanted to overthrow the government and establish a new working class government. And anarchists want nothing to do with the government. The idea is that with voluntary associations, with labor unions and cooperatives or whatever. They're just going to create it without state involvement and without coercion. They will create it on a voluntary basis. That's what anarchism is. It's a form of socialism that rejects using the state to create socialism. Socialism without the state is anarchism. Modern day libertarianism is a philosophy that just says, that embraces the anti-collectivism of the right and market liberalism and the anti-collectivism of the left and social liberalism, right? You have the corporations can do whatever they want. They have no obligation to the country, and individuals can do whatever they want. They have no obligation to their family, to society, or whatever. As long as we respect everyone else's property rights, non-aggression principle, everyone can just live. That's libertarianism. Libertarianism is a free market individualist philosophy. Anarchism is a collectivist wing of the socialist movement that argues socialism can be created without any state coercion. Those are the beliefs. So there we go. All right. Anarchism, feminism, National Socialism, utopian. I don't know what you're getting at, Anway, but good luck to you. Good luck to you. Oh boy. All right. Favorite atheist and favorite fundamentalist. Okay, my favorite atheist is Chairman Omali Yeshitela, because that guy, he joked about being an atheist. He doesn't believe in God. He's a pure materialist, but he's got a spiritual power that is amazing. The guy is 80 years old, and he's in the best shape I've ever seen, and he is so charismatic, and he's got a group of people around him who are so full of optimism and belief in what the Uhuru movement is doing. And even though they face so much persecution from the government, they are just in this optimistic energy. It's amazing. So Chairman O'Malley is my favorite atheist. Chairman Omali Yeshitela, one of the Uhuru 3 defendants. Favorite fundamentalist would be Reverend Jack Hyles, even though he did a lot of things and said a lot of things I don't agree with. I could listen to Jack Hyles preach all day long, and it is exactly what I need to hear. And he talks about persecution, and he talks about having an optimistic pro-growth attitude and standing on your principles and not giving in. So Jack Hyles, I will say, well, I was going to comment. There's a case that you and I have talked about, but I probably shouldn't comment just because of, why, Gavin, but, I'm paying attention to that case, but I'm not going to say anything about that now, probably for his own, there's another case I've been paying attention to. I'll just leave it at that. All right. So any thoughts on the new PCR Communist Party in CDN? What? I'm Googling this. The PCR Communist Party in CDN. PCR Communist Party in CDN. What? What is that? I have no idea what that is, Brutus. It's in Canada. Oh, you're talking about the Maoist group in Canada. It's like the Gonzaloite Shining Path ultra Maoist group in Canada, right? The Revolutionary Communist Party of Canada, right? It's just, it's like the RCP of the United States, but it's in Canada, and they're a little more classically Maoist. They're not, Bob Avakian has done his own thing, but there's a wing of people I call like ultra Maoists, that they broke with China after the death of Mao. They think China restored capitalism with the rise of Deng Xiaoping. They think the Soviet Union had restored capitalism with the death of Stalin, and they are very much, they kind of fetishize violence, and they are opposed to all communist parties around the world, and they really admire the Peruvian extremist group, the Shining Path, El Sendero Luminoso. I would consider that to be an ultra-leftist trend. I don't know what more to say about it. That's an ultra-leftist trend. That's, I would encourage you, if you really want a critique of that kind of thinking, read Letter to Bob Avakian, right? Honestly, very few people have read this book. I wrote this book, and I think this is probably one of my best works because it explains my worldview by contrasting it with someone else's. very carefully and meticulously. I let him speak for himself with quotations and all of that. And I contrast this very prominent American communist and his views with my own in a very honest way. I hope you read it. Go and read it. Or go read Letter to Bob Avakian. Honestly, this book, and towards the end, I talk about my religious conversion and how I returned to God. And this is really, and I talk about, this is really one of my best pieces. I really do. Not many people have read it, and that's because it's on an obscure topic. It's, criticizing obscure communist leaders. Hey, somebody asked, dude. Somebody asked, right? Somebody asked. But anyway, yeah. No, I get, you're not criticizing me. You're just pointing out, yeah. And that, look, I spent my entire adult life in communist groups trying to figure things out. And I'm at the point where there are certain principles I believe in, like economic growth, opposing degrowth, like anti-imperialism. And I've been to the anti-imperialist world, and I'm inspired by the new world rising around Russia and China. And because of that, I can't call myself a communist anymore, because to be a communist is to be lost. It's to be lost in la la land. You're playing games in your head. The world is much more complicated now, and there are countries around the world like China and Vietnam and North Korea that are led by communists. But there is an anti-imperialist world that has changed a lot since the Cold War days. And there is a God, and there is spirituality. And this is a spiritual war that we are in, between growth and degrowth, between optimism and innovation and hope, and the culture of death and pessimism. And it's so much bigger than all of that. So there we go. Believe in green energy, green business, innovation, growth, productive entrepreneurship programs, scientific industrial urbanization. Man, I agree with all those things. So, thoughts on Antifa? Helpful, hindrance? I'm opposed to Antifa. I really am. There was a time when I was a leftist, when I was in the Workers' World Party, that I romanticized groups like Antifa. I thought, fascists won't give us our freedom, so we won't give them theirs, and all of this. And then it took me not being in one of those groups, but being in the media and covering the protests to realize how, first of all, Antifa are the best friends the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazis ever had. They really are, because they make sure their arguments never get answered, and they respond to them with violence, and they make, they make them look like victims. They make them the center of attention. They're just these anonymous people with hoods over their face trying to silence them. It is, they're the best friend actual Nazis and fascists ever had. And on top of that, Antifa, when I was first doing stuff, Antifa existed, and it was anarchists, and they only went after actual Nazis, like skinheads, white supremacists. And they often would cooperate with communists to do it. And they would target like skinhead neo-Nazi groups, and they would infiltrate their events and get in fistfights with them. And the Progressive Labor Party, which was a communist group from the 70s, would cooperate with them a lot. And, even then it was kind of an intelligence agency. I mean, the Southern Poverty Law Center is like a legal entity, but there's overlap between them, I'm sure. And it's like, it's an illegal kind of clandestine. It was an illegal kind of clandestine group that went out of its way to shut down and inflict violence on neo-Nazis. And they only targeted neo-Nazis. They worked with communists. That was a little bit different. Honestly, I'm not sure. I don't even agree with that, but it was different. Around the time that Trump got into office the first time, suddenly Antifa was targeting conservatives, not neo-Nazis and skinheads, conservatives. And that was weird, because Antifa never did that. And then Antifa started targeting regular leftists and socialists and communists. I am on Antifa's list. I've been targeted by Antifa. I've been threatened by Antifa. I've been doxxed. I've been, and I'm an anti-racist. And at this point, Antifa is an evil organization. There's no question about it. And it's an intelligence operation also. They're not going after neo-Nazis. They're going after Trump supporters. They're threatening Trump supporters. They're trying to make people's lives miserable for disagreeing with the liberal order, for disagreeing with wokeness. And they're no good. I mean, they are fascists, if there ever was one. I mean, what did fascists do historically? They went around beating up communists and being violent against them. That's what Antifa does. If you don't agree with World War III against Russia, if you don't agree with, voting for Kamala Harris, they label you a Nazi. They try to get you fired from your job, and they threaten you with violence, and they try to come to your events and beat you up. And that's pretty evil. That's pretty awful. Don't agree with that. It's weird that the name, what Antifa is now is very, very different than what Antifa used to be. It used to be a group of people that were very committed to opposing Nazis. And honestly, they did it in illegal ways that I don't think were good. I don't even think it was good then. But what the entity that calls itself Antifa now, and that's the thing. It took me there is this romantic image, and people talk about the Battle of Cable Street in Britain and all of that. And I mean, I'm sorry, I've been targeted by these people, right? And that's one thing, like, well, I don't know. I don't want to get negative tonight, but, again, not going to focus on the negativity. But, I have spent my entire adult life on the left, and the left doesn't want me. I mean, despite the fact that I've done I've risked my life on a ship to Yemen, and I've stood in solidarity, and despite all of the great things I've done, video recorded acts of police brutality, I video recorded, the police beating up students in Cleveland. It got them acquitted in juvenile court. And it's like my record of opposing, and standing up for the things leftists are supposed to believe in is really long, but it doesn't matter. All the leftists think I'm a Nazi now. I'm a Nazi. I'm a white supremacist. I'm an evil pedo rapist, evil, awful person. And none of that matters, right? Because leftism is at this point synonymous with evil, right? It's not about workers controlling the means of production. It's not about rationally controlling the economy. It's not about anti-imperialism. It's not even about anti-racism. It's just about evil. That's all it's about. It's about hate. It's about resentment. It's about opposing optimism and hope, right? And the left, I mean, at this point, the left are just evil. I mean, that's what they are. Even when I agree with them, the Palestine rallies, I agreed with them. I'm 100% pro-Palestine. I'm very anti-Israel. I've spoken at anti-Israel conferences in Iran, but I went to those rallies and I was threatened. People threatened me and all of that. And on top of that, those rallies were disgusting. Even though I agreed with the cause, they're out there giving the middle finger. They all, they're all dirty and messy and free Palestine. Fuck you. I mean, it was like designed to offend anyone who had any common decency, right? Everything they did is just grimy and gross and hateful and negative. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just like the left at this point. I mean, it's like they don't agree with any of the principles that leftism is supposed to agree with. They're just sinister. So yeah, I mean, I'm not with the left. I'm an innovationist. I'm not a communist. I have certain principles that I believe in. I am for a rationally organized planned economy. I'm for economic growth. I'm anti-imperialist, and the left is not. So there you go. Anyway, folks, we're about to hit the 3-hour mark. It's been a late night. Sorry to get negative there at the end. I'm just responding to questions that people asked, but hey, folks, we just keep going. I am super pumped. Wait until you see The Thing. Can't tell you what The Thing is, but I can assure you, you're going to like The Thing. Wait until you see The Thing. It's going to be good. And then on top of that, while we're at it, in addition to The Thing, join CPI. Membership is open once again. And we're heading to the inauguration. We are headed to DC for the inauguration. We've got some important work to do. All right. Thanks, folks. Thank you very much. I guess I'll put on the closing music. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.